Folks still ask me about the woman who married the wild man. They want to know if it's true. If she really stood in Fallow Ridge's town square and offered herself to a caged beast everyone said should hang. I tell them yes, it's all true, every word of it. I was there that day, saw it with my own eyes. I'm old now, nearly 80 years on this earth. I've delivered over 300 babies into this world, set countless broken bones, closed the eyes of more men than I care to count. But that day in September of 1875, that's the one that changed how I understood what medicine really is. My name is Patrick Morrison. I was the doctor in Cedar Falls back then. Still am, though my hands shake more than they used to. My knees complain when the weather turns, but my memory, that's sharp as ever, especially when it comes to Eleanor Hayes and the man we called Jacob Stone. I was standing at my wife's grave when this story came back to me today. 20 years she's been gone. Margaret died of the fever in 75, same year all this happened. Couldn't save her, couldn't save my own wife. With all my medical training, all my knowledge of the body meant nothing when the fever took hold. That failure nearly broke me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it started. Let me tell you about the dust of Fallow Ridge. The dust in that town had a particular taste to it, bitter as spent gunpowder, dry as old bones. I rode through Fallow Ridge that September afternoon on a medical call. Old Hank Peterson had gotten himself kicked by a mule, needed someone to set his ribs proper. The town sat in a shallow valley, all weathered wood and false fronts, the kind of place men built quick and left quicker. Silver had been found in the hills 3 years back, not much, just enough to draw the desperate and the hopeful. When the silver played out, most folks moved on. The ones who stayed were the stubborn kind, the ones with nowhere else to go. The heat that day was merciless, sun beating down like God's own hammer. No shade anywhere except under the wooden awnings. Even the dogs had given up, lying in whatever shadow they could find. That's when I saw the crowd. Maybe 50 people gathered in the town square, more than I'd ever seen in Fallow Ridge at one time. They stood in a rough circle, pointing, whispering, some laughing, others shaking their heads. I should have ridden past, should have tended to Hank and gone on my way. But something about that crowd pulled at me, the way people gather at hangings, at horse races, at anything that breaks the monotony of frontier life. I dismounted and tied my horse to the rail outside the general store. That's when I saw the cage. It sat in the center of the square like a monument to cruelty, 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, iron bars thick as a man's wrist, the kind of thing you'd use to hold a grizzly bear, or a man you wanted everyone to know wasn't human anymore. Inside, a figure sat motionless against the back bars. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the heavy shackles on his wrists, the chains that bound him to the cage floor. He sat with his knees drawn up, head lowered, dark hair hanging past his shoulders, matted and unkempt. The sun had turned that iron cage into an oven. Heat shimmered off the bars. I knew what that felt like. I'd seen men kept in similar conditions during the war. It broke them, body and spirit both. "How long's he been in there?" someone asked. A newcomer, judging by his clean clothes. 3 weeks come Tuesday, a woman answered. She wore a bonnet that had seen better days. "Sheriff Bradley's keeping him till the circuit judge comes through." What did he do? The woman's voice dropped. Took on that tone people use when they're telling ghost stories. "Killed a man up in the mountains. Tom Garrett, maybe killed more than one. They say he went wild after—" She stopped, glanced around nervously. "Well, after what happened to his family." I pushed closer through the crowd. The late afternoon sun beat down merciless. I could see how it baked that iron cage. The man inside hadn't moved, hadn't even lifted his head at the sound of voices. His clothes were torn and dusty, hung loose on a frame that suggested former strength worn down by captivity. But even through the grime, I could see something. This wasn't a wild animal. Animals pace, animals snarl. This man sat still as carved stone. The stillness of deep grief, I thought. I'd seen it before. "Why keep him like an animal?" a woman's voice asked. Clear, steady. Not from around here, I could tell. I turned to look at who'd spoken. She stood at the edge of the crowd, a woman maybe 27 or 28. Dusty from travel. Her dress had been good quality once, but was worn now. A carpetbag sat at her feet. Everything about her said, "just arrived." Nothing about her said, "staying." The bonnet-wearing woman snorted, "Because that's what he is. You didn't hear the stories. They found him living in a cave, they did. Hadn't spoken a word in years. When they tried to bring him in, peaceful-like, he fought like a wildcat. Took 6 men to subdue him." "But what was his crime exactly?" the newcomer pressed. "Crime?" The woman's voice rose. "They found bones in that cave. Human bones. And the Garrett family that went missing last winter, their wagon was found not a mile from where he was living." I watched the newcomer study the caged man. Her face was hard to read, not frightened like the others, not gleeful at someone else's misfortune, something else. Recognition, maybe. She looked at him the way I'd learned to look at patients, trying to see past the surface, trying to understand what was really wrong. "Move along, folks." Sheriff Clayton Bradley's voice boomed across the square. "Nothing more to see here. You've all had your look." The crowd began to disperse, but the woman remained. And so did I. I'd known Clayton Bradley for 5 years. He was a good man in peacetime, fair enough when dealing with drunks and land disputes. But he lacked the steel needed for hard decisions. He bent whichever way the wind blew strongest. Right now, that wind was blowing toward a hanging. The woman walked closer to the cage. Sheriff Bradley noticed. "Ma'am," he said, "I told you to move along." "Is he fed?" she asked. Direct. No nonsense. "Is he given food? Water?" Bradley's face reddened. "Of course he is. We're not barbarians. Now get going before—" "I'd like to speak with him." The sheriff laughed. Harsh sound. "Lady, that man hasn't spoken a word since we brought him in. Won't even tell us his name. Besides, it ain't safe." "He's in a cage," the woman pointed out. "How much harm can he do?" "You'd be surprised." But she was already walking toward the cage. Behind her, I heard Sheriff Bradley curse and follow. Professional curiosity made me follow too. The man in the cage didn't look up as she approached, didn't acknowledge her presence even when she stopped just outside arm's reach. Up close, I could see more clearly. A thin line of dried blood ran from his temple to his jaw. An old wound, poorly tended. His hands bore the scars of hard labor. Calluses that spoke of years working with tools. Carpenter's hands, I thought, or a blacksmith's. "Sir," the woman said softly. "Nothing." She turned back to the sheriff. "I asked you what was his crime, his actual crime, not stories about bones or missing families. What evidence do you have?" Bradley's jaw worked. "He killed Tom Garrett. Found him standing over the body, blood on his hands." "Was it self-defense?" "Don't matter. Tom Garrett was a respected man in these parts. Had a wife. 3 children. This creature took him from them." The woman looked back at the caged man. I saw something in her face then, something that made me pay closer attention. Pain, recognizing pain. Injustice, recognizing injustice. "What will happen to him?" she asked quietly. "Judge will hang him most likely." Sheriff Bradley spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Though some folks are calling for worse. Tom Garrett had a lot of friends." The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised me. She turned to look directly at me. "You're a doctor, aren't you?" I glanced down at my medical bag. "I am. Patrick Morrison, from Cedar Falls." "Has anyone tended his wounds?" She gestured toward the blood on the prisoner's face. I shook my head. "Not that I know of." "Would you?" Sheriff Bradley stepped forward. "Now hold on. Please," she said to me. Ignored the sheriff entirely. "I'll pay you." I looked at the caged man, looked at the woman. Something was happening here, something I didn't fully understand yet. But I've learned to trust my instincts. And my instinct said this woman was about to do something remarkable. "I'll tend him," I said. The sheriff protested, but I pointed out that a dead prisoner before trial wouldn't look good when the circuit judge arrived. Bradley grumbled but unlocked a small panel in the cage wall, just big enough to pass things through. I cleaned the wound on the man's head. He never flinched. Never made a sound, just sat there with that terrible stillness. But when I looked into his eyes, gray as winter storms, I saw something that made my breath catch. Pain, deep and endless. But not madness, not violence. This was a man who had lost everything and couldn't find his way back to the world. "What's your name?" I asked softly as I worked. He didn't answer, didn't even look at me. "Can you speak? Or has something happened to your voice?" The woman knelt beside me. "May I?" She held out her hand. The caged man's eyes shifted to her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then slowly, he extended his shackled hands toward the opening. She took them gently, turned them over, examined the rope burns on his wrists, the scarring on his palms. "You're a craftsman," she said. Not a question, a statement. "These are working hands, good hands." His eyes held hers. I saw his throat work as if trying to remember how to form words, but nothing came out. "It's all right," she said. "You don't have to speak, not now." She released his hands, stood, brushed dust from her skirt. When she turned to face the few remaining onlookers, her expression had changed, set with determination. That's when I knew. Whatever she was about to do, it would change everything. "Sheriff Bradley," she said, her voice carried across the square, "I want to make you a proposition." I watched her reach into her carpet bag, pull out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a ring, gold, catching the last rays of sunlight. A wedding ring, I realized. "This man needs someone to speak for him," she said. "Someone to take responsibility." "What are you talking about?" Bradley demanded. She turned to face the small crowd that had gathered again, drawn by the spectacle like moths to flame. "You all believe in justice, don't you?" Her voice was steady, strong. "In the law?" Murmurs of agreement, some confused, some hostile. "Then you must believe in mercy too, in redemption." She held up the ring. "I'm offering to marry this man, take responsibility for him. If he's truly the monster you say, then I'll be the one to suffer for it. But if he's not," the silence that followed was deafening. Then someone laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Others joined in. Soon the square rang with mockery. "You lost your mind, woman." "Must be touched by the sun." "Marry that thing? You'd be dead before morning." But she stood her ground. I'd seen courage before, in war, in childbirth, in men facing death. This was different. This was a woman choosing to step into the line of fire when she could simply walk away. "I'm sound of mind," she said loudly. "And I know what I'm offering." Sheriff Bradley shook his head. "You don't even know his name." "Do you?" The sheriff had no answer to that. "You've kept him caged for 3 weeks without trial," she pressed on, "without even knowing who he is. Where I come from, that's not justice. Where you come from don't matter. This is Fallow Ridge, and we do things. I know how you do things." Her voice turned hard, cold. "I've seen it before." Something in her tone made everyone go quiet. I saw pain flash across her face, old pain, the kind that never fully heals. Then it happened. She swayed slightly, her eyes unfocused, and for just a moment she wasn't in Fallow Ridge anymore. I could see it in her face, the memory taking hold. A bedroom, small, dim, curtains drawn against daylight. Eleanor, I didn't know her name yet, but that's who she was, sitting on the edge of a bed, still wearing her mourning dress. 3 days since the funeral. 3 days since they'd buried James in the cold Ohio ground. Outside the door, voices, women's voices. Poor thing, hasn't said a word since it happened. Well, what can she say? Her husband shot down like a dog, and those men walking free. It's shameful. Hush now. She might hear you. Eleanor stood, moved to the door, tried the handle, locked. "For your own good, dear," her sister-in-law had said, "you need rest. You're not thinking clearly." But it wasn't rest they wanted. It was silence. They'd locked her in, kept her away from town, away from the sheriff, away from anyone who might listen to what she had to say about the men who killed James. She was a prisoner in her own home, caged by grief and fear, and the town's determination to look away from injustice. She'd stood at that locked door for hours, unable to speak, unable to scream, unable to do anything but feel the walls closing in, just like the man in that iron cage. The memory released her. She blinked, focused again on Fallow Ridge, on the watching crowd. But I'd seen it. That moment when past and present collided, when she recognized her own captivity in his. "I know what it's like," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "I know what it's like to be caged and have everyone watch you suffer." She looked at the prisoner again. He'd lifted his head fully now, those gray eyes fixed on her, seeing her, really seeing her. And in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. They were both prisoners, both silenced, both condemned by fear and judgment. I realized then what was happening. This wasn't charity. This wasn't even justice, not really. This was recognition. One wounded soul seeing another and saying, "I will not let you die alone in that cage," because she knew what that cage felt like. Sheriff Bradley was still protesting, the crowd still murmuring. But I barely heard them. I was watching Eleanor's face, watching the caged man's face. Two strangers, two griefs, finding each other in the dust and heat of a godforsaken frontier town. I'm a man of science, a doctor. I deal in facts, in evidence, in things I can see and measure and treat. But standing there that day, I understood something my medical training had never taught me. Sometimes healing has nothing to do with medicine. Sometimes it's about witness, about one person seeing another's pain and saying, "You are not alone." Eleanor Hayes, I learned her name later, was about to save that man's life, but not in the way anyone expected. She was going to save him by refusing to look away, by standing in that square and saying to an entire town, "I see him. I see his humanity, and I will not pretend otherwise." It was the bravest thing I ever witnessed, and it was only the beginning. The sun had dropped lower. Long shadows stretched across Fallow Ridge's town square. The crowd had grown. Word spreads fast in small towns, especially when something impossible is happening. I stood to one side, medical bag in hand, watching, waiting to see how this would play out. Eleanor Hayes held that gold ring in her hand like a weapon, or a shield, or maybe both. "You're insane," Sheriff Bradley declared. But I could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes. The crowd pressed closer, their hostility thick in the dust-heavy air. "Perhaps," Eleanor replied, calm as still water. "But insanity isn't illegal. Neither is marriage," she raised her voice to carry across the square. "Unless the good people of Fallow Ridge have decided to abandon all pretense of law." "The law?" A man pushed forward from the crowd, tall, well-dressed, the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. "That creature murdered my brother." I recognized him. Marcus Garrett, owner of the largest ranch in the territory, Tom Garrett's older brother. "Tom was checking his trap lines," Marcus continued. His voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Innocent as a lamb, when this animal attacked him." "Were you there, Mr. Garrett?" Eleanor asked. His face darkened. "I didn't need to be. We found Tom's body not 50 yards from where this savage made his den, blood still on his hands." "And did anyone see what happened? Any witnesses?" "Witnesses?" Garrett laughed bitterly. "In the mountains, the only witness is sitting in that cage, and he won't talk, won't even defend himself." His mouth twisted. "What innocent man refuses to speak?" Eleanor turned to look at the prisoner. He'd raised his head fully now, watching this exchange with those storm-gray eyes. There was intelligence there, sharp and present. He understood every word. "Sometimes," Eleanor said quietly, "grief takes our voices. Sometimes pain runs so deep that words become meaningless." Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat. I saw it. That gesture. She was remembering something. Her own silence, maybe. Her own time when words failed. "Grief," A woman's voice from the crowd, sharp with fear. What grief could excuse what we found in that cave? The bones, someone else added. The belongings of travelers who'd gone missing. Old bones, Sheriff Bradley corrected. He looked uncomfortable. Could have been anyone's. Years old, the doctor said. And the belongings? The first woman insisted. The Garrett family's wagon? I watched Eleanor. Watched her consider this. She was no fool. She knew the evidence looked damning, but she was looking past evidence to something else. She knelt down, brought herself level with the prisoner. "Sir," she said gently, "I need to know, did you harm the Garrett family, the women and children?" The crowd went silent, waiting. For a long moment, nothing. The prisoner just stared at her. Then, slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, he shook his head. One clear gesture. No. "He's lying!" Marcus Garrett surged forward. Two men held him back. "Don't listen to him." "He didn't speak," Eleanor pointed out. She stood, faced Garrett directly. "He answered my question with a gesture, and I choose to believe him." She turned to Sheriff Bradley. "You found old bones in a cave. You found a wagon. You found this man near a body. That's all circumstantial. Where I come from, we call that insufficient evidence." "Where you come from doesn't matter," Bradley said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Then your law should protect all men equally," Eleanor said, "even those who can't or won't speak for themselves." She paused. "Especially them." She reached into her carpet bag again, pulled out a small leather folder. "These are my papers. Eleanor Hayes, widow, formerly of Coshocton County, Ohio, 27 years old, of sound mind and body." She met Bradley's eyes. "I have the legal right to marry, and I'm exercising it." The crowd erupted, angry voices, confused questions. I heard snippets. "She's the one Morrison was supposed to marry. Traveled all this way alone. Must be desperate or crazy." Eleanor let them talk. She'd learned something I recognized. Sometimes you have to let people exhaust themselves before they'll listen. "Sheriff," she said when the noise died down, "I'm not asking you to free him unconditionally. I'm offering to take responsibility, to remove him from your town. If he proves dangerous, it'll be on my head." She paused. "Let that sink in. But if he's innocent, if you hang an innocent man because fear made you see a monster where there was only grief, that blood will be on your hands, and on the hands of everyone here who stood by and let it happen." Sheriff Bradley wavered. I could see it. The way his hand moved unconsciously to his badge, the way his eyes darted between Eleanor, the crowd, and the caged man. "Even if I agreed," he said finally, "we'd need a minister, and Reverend Walsh won't perform a wedding for him." "Then we'll make do without one," Eleanor said. "A civil ceremony. You have the authority as sheriff. I won't be party to this madness. Then I will." A new voice spoke up. The crowd parted. An elderly man limped forward, leaning heavily on a walking stick. I recognized him immediately. Judge Owen O'Brien. Had to be pushing 70. He'd been riding circuit for 30 years, knew more law than any man in the territory. "Judge O'Brien." Sheriff Bradley straightened. "You can't seriously consider—" "I've been watching from my window," O'Brien interrupted. His voice was papery with age but still sharp. "Listening to this young woman speak more sense than I've heard in this town for months." He limped closer, fixed his keen eyes on Eleanor. "You truly wish to marry this man, knowing nothing about him except what fear and rumors say?" "I know he's been caged for 3 weeks without trial," Eleanor replied. "I know he's been condemned without speaking in his own defense." She paused, chose her words carefully. "And I know what it's like to lose everything and have no one believe your truth." I saw something pass across O'Brien's weathered face. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. He nodded slowly, turned to address the prisoner. "And you, young man, do you consent to this marriage?" The man in the cage lifted his shackled hands, chains clanking. With effort, he pressed his palms together, inclined his head, a gesture that might have been prayer or acceptance, or both. "He consents," Judge O'Brien declared. He turned to Sheriff Bradley. "Open the cage." "Judge, I can't just—" "Open it, or explain to the circuit court why you held a man without formal charges and denied him the opportunity for legal matrimony." I had to admire the old judge. He knew exactly which legal strings to pull. The sheriff's face was thunderous. But he reached for his keys. The crowd surged backward, as if the prisoner might burst free and attack them all. "Stand back," Bradley ordered. "Any sudden moves, and I'll shoot you where you stand." The man moved slowly to the far side of the cage, hands visible, head slightly bowed. I noticed how he moved, not like an animal, like someone who'd learned to make himself unthreatening, to take up as little space as possible. The lock clicked open. The door swung wide with a screech of protesting metal. "Out!" Sheriff Bradley commanded, slow and easy. The prisoner emerged into the fading daylight. This was the first clear look anyone had gotten of him. Taller than I'd expected, broad-shouldered despite his time in captivity, maybe 6'2". His clothes were torn and filthy, but underneath the grime, I could see they'd once been well made. His feet were bare, scarred from walking on rough ground. But it was his face that caught my attention. Strong jaw covered in weeks of beard, angular features marked by hardship, cheekbones too prominent from not eating enough, and those gray eyes that seemed to hold storms. He wasn't handsome in any conventional way, but there was something about him, a dignity that captivity hadn't broken, a gentleness in those storm eyes despite everything. "The shackles stay on," Sheriff Bradley announced, "until you're out of my town." Eleanor stepped forward, close enough now to smell the cage stink on him, the sweat and fear and resignation. She held up her wedding ring. "I, Eleanor Hayes," she said clearly, "take this man as my lawful husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, from this day forward." Judge O'Brien cleared his throat. "And do you—" He paused, frowned. "What is your name, son?" The prisoner's mouth opened slightly, then closed. His throat worked as if trying to remember how to form words. Finally, he shook his head. "He can't speak," Eleanor said. "Or won't? Does it matter?" "For legal purposes. Then I'll name him." Eleanor looked into those gray eyes. "Is that acceptable? May I give you a name for the law's sake?" The man studied her, long moment, then nodded once. Eleanor thought. I could see her mind working, taking in his storm-gray eyes, his mountain-weathered face, the sorrow that seemed to emanate from him like heat from sun-baked stone. "Jacob," she said. "Jacob Stone, is that acceptable?" Another nod, this one carrying perhaps a hint of bitter amusement. "Then do you, Jacob Stone," Judge O'Brien asked, "take this woman as your lawful wife?" Jacob, I'd think of him as that now, raised his shackled hands again. With clumsy fingers, he pointed to Eleanor, then to himself, then pressed his palms together once more. "I'll take that as consent," O'Brien said dryly. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife." He turned to Eleanor, something like pity in his eyes. "God help you, young woman. You may have just signed your own death warrant." Eleanor took the ring she'd been holding, reached for Jacob's hand. He flinched at first, then held still as she slipped it onto his finger. The ring was too small, would only fit on his smallest finger, but he curled his hand to keep it in place. A ring that had belonged to her first husband, now on the hand of a stranger she'd just married to save his life. "Now get out of my town," Sheriff Bradley growled. "Both of you. And if he so much as—" "We're going," Eleanor said. She picked up her carpet bag, started walking toward the edge of town. Behind her, I heard the shuffle of bare feet on dust, the clink of chains. Jacob Stone, her husband now, followed at a distance, as if unsure whether this freedom was real or just another form of cage. I should have let them go, should have tended to Hank Peterson's ribs and ridden back to Cedar Falls, but I couldn't. Something about this woman's courage, this man's quiet dignity, it pulled at me, made me want to see how it would end. So I followed them, keeping my distance, just watching. At the town's border, where the buildings gave way to open country, Eleanor stopped, turned. The crowd had followed too, maintaining a safe distance, making sure they truly left. Sheriff Bradley stood at the front, hand resting on his pistol. "The shackles," Eleanor called out. "You said they come off when we leave town." "When you're well away," Bradley corrected. "Send them back with the next traveler you meet, or I'll hunt you both down." I saw anger flash across Eleanor's face, but she swallowed it, nodded. There would be time to deal with shackles later. She looked at Jacob, standing there in the dying light, chains on his wrists, her ring on his finger. Two strangers bound by law and desperation. "Can you walk?" she asked. "We need to put miles between us and them before dark." He nodded, gestured down the road with his bound hands. The message was clear. Lead the way. Eleanor shouldered her carpet bag, started walking. The road stretched ahead into gathering darkness, toward mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. Behind them, Fallow Ridge watched and whispered, already turning her act of mercy into legend. The kind of story told in saloons, the kind that made men shake their heads and women clutch their children closer. But Eleanor didn't look back. She'd made her choice in front of witnesses, traded her last valuable possession for a man's freedom. Now came the harder part, learning who she'd actually married, and whether her instincts about the gentle sorrow in his eyes had been right, or whether the town's fears would prove justified. I mounted my horse, followed at a distance, just to make sure they got away safely. That's what I told myself. The truth was simpler. I needed to know how this story ended. They walked for maybe 2 hours, following a wagon trail that wound between scrub brush and scattered boulders. Eleanor's feet must have ached in her worn boots. Her carpet bag grew heavier with each mile, but she didn't complain. Behind her, Jacob's chains clinked softly with each step, a rhythm that reminded them both they were still not truly free. When full darkness made the trail treacherous, Eleanor stopped near a cluster of juniper trees, some shelter from the wind. "We'll camp here," she said, set down her bag with relief. Jacob stood uncertainly at the edge of the small clearing, 10 feet away from her. He'd maintained that careful distance since leaving town, like a beaten dog, unsure of kindness. "You can sit," Eleanor said gently. "I'm going to gather some firewood." He shook his head sharply, moved toward the surrounding brush. Despite the shackles hampering his movements, he began collecting dried branches, working with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. I watched from my hidden spot among the rocks, watched him arrange the wood with precise care, larger pieces at the base, kindling properly placed for airflow. From her carpet bag, Eleanor pulled out matches. But before she could offer them, Jacob was already at work. He'd found 2 suitable stones, struck them together with his bound hands, sending sparks into a small nest of dried grass he'd prepared. It took several tries, the chains limiting his movement, but soon a tiny flame caught and grew. "You've done this before," Eleanor observed. Jacob glanced up at her, then back to the growing fire, feeding it carefully until warmth began to push back the desert night's chill. Eleanor unpacked what little she had, a blanket, some hardtack and dried beef, a dented canteen half full of water. She laid these out between them, an offering of sorts. Jacob studied the meager supplies, then rose, disappeared into the darkness without a sound, despite his chains. I saw Eleanor tense, fear flickering across her face. Had he run? Had the townspeople been right about his wild nature? But before panic could take hold, he returned, carrying something in his cupped hands. He knelt by the fire, showed her prickly pear fruits, carefully harvested despite the thorns. Using a flat stone, he scraped away the spines with practiced movements, then offered her the cleaned fruit. Eleanor bit into one cautiously, found it sweet, the juice a blessing after hours of dusty travel. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, prepared more, his movements economical, focused. She noticed how he handled the knife-sharp spines, not carelessly, but with the patience of someone who'd learned to work around obstacles. I realized I was watching something remarkable. Two people who'd met hours ago. One who couldn't speak, one who'd risked everything, finding a way to care for each other through simple acts. This was medicine too, just not the kind they taught in medical school. They ate in silence, sharing the hardtack and beef, the cactus fruit for dessert. Jacob took only small portions until Eleanor pushed more toward him. Even then, he ate slowly, as if remembering how. When the meal was finished, Eleanor pulled out a sewing kit. "Those clothes are falling apart," she said. "I'm no great seamstress, but I can at least mend the worst tears." Jacob looked down at himself, as if seeing his state for the first time. He plucked at his shirt, found a rent that exposed most of his side. Something like embarrassment crossed his features. "May I?" Eleanor held up needle and thread. He hesitated, then moved closer to the fire, turned to give her access to the torn fabric. She worked carefully. I could see his tension, the way he held himself perfectly still. Through the tears in his clothes, she could see old scars crossing his ribs, some that looked like claw marks, others that might have been from knives or bullets. "You've survived a lot," she said quietly, not making it a question. His shoulders moved. Might have been acknowledgement. As she worked, Eleanor found herself talking, partly to fill the silence, partly because something about the darkness and firelight made confession easier. "My husband, my first husband, was named James. He was a good man, gentle, too gentle for the men who wanted our land." Her needle paused. "They shot him in the back while he was plowing, said it was a hunting accident, but the ball came from a Spencer rifle. And everyone knew only one man in the county had one." Jacob turned his head slightly, listening. "The law did nothing," Eleanor continued, her stitches careful and tight. "Said there wasn't enough evidence. The man who killed James sat in church every Sunday after that, smiling at me like he'd done me a favor." She resumed sewing. "I sold the farm to him for half its worth. What choice did I have? A widow alone, no family, neighbors who looked the other way." She finished with the worst tear, moved to another. "That's when I answered Samuel Morrison's advertisement. A new start, he promised. A place where the past didn't matter." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, I found another town full of frightened people ready to hang a man without knowing his truth." Jacob shifted. She realized he was looking at her directly, for the first time since they'd made camp. In the firelight, his gray eyes held something that might have been understanding. "I know you have a story too," Eleanor said. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll listen, but I won't push. We've both had enough of people demanding things from us." She finished the last repair she could manage in the dim light, tied off the thread. "There, not pretty, but it'll hold." Jacob examined her work, running a finger along the neat stitches. Then he did something that surprised both of them. He reached for her carpet bag, gestured questioningly. "You want to see what else needs mending?" He shook his head, pointed to the bag's handle, which was indeed coming loose from the body. "Oh, yes, that's been worrying me. If it breaks entirely—" He held out his shackled hands for the bag. Despite her curiosity, Eleanor handed it over. He examined the failing connection with the same focused attention he'd given to building the fire, then began working, using his teeth to hold the leather while his bound hands pulled fallen stitches free and re-wove them in a stronger pattern. "You know leather work," Eleanor observed. A pause in his movements, then a small nod. "Were you a craftsman before?" His hands stilled completely. For a moment she thought she'd pushed too far. Then he set the bag aside, held up his hands, showing her his palms in the firelight. Even beneath the dirt and recent wounds, she could see the calluses of long labor, the particular patterns that came from working with tools. He pointed to the fire, made a hammering motion. "A blacksmith?" He tilted his hand back and forth, close, but not quite. "Farrier?" Another partial gesture. "Both? You worked with metal and horses?" This time, a clear nod. He picked up a small stick, smoothed a patch of dirt near the fire. With careful strokes, he drew the outline of a horseshoe, then added decorative elements. The kind of fancy work that spoke of skill beyond mere function. "You were an artist," Eleanor said softly, "not just a tradesman." Something flickered across his face, pride perhaps, or pain at the memory. He scrubbed out the drawing with his palm, returned to fixing her bag. From my hiding spot I understood something then. This man, Jacob Stone, as she'd named him, carried a past, a life before the cage, before the silence, before whatever broke him. He'd been someone, a craftsman, an artist, someone who made beautiful things. What had happened to reduce him to this, to silence and solitude and a cave in the mountains? I would find out eventually, but that night, watching them by the fire, I knew only this. Eleanor Hayes had seen something true. Beneath the grime and silence and fear, she'd recognized a good man brought low by circumstance. Her instincts had been right, and that gave me hope, not just for them, but for all of us. That sometimes in this hard land, justice could still prevail. That sometimes one person's courage could change everything. The fire burned lower. I remounted my horse, rode quietly back toward Cedar Falls. I'd seen enough to know they'd be safe tonight. Enough to know this story was worth following. I'd check on them again soon, bring supplies maybe, medicine if they needed it. For now, I left them to their fragile peace. Two strangers learning to trust each other through small kindnesses and shared silence. Sometimes I thought the best medicine is simply to witness, to see someone suffering and refuse to look away. Eleanor Hayes understood that, and in understanding it, she'd saved more than one life that day. She'd saved her own too. I didn't see Eleanor and Jacob again for 3 days. My practice kept me busy. Old Hank Peterson's ribs needed checking. A rancher's wife had gone into labor. A miner had gotten himself bit by a rattlesnake. The usual litany of frontier ailments. But I thought about them, wondered if they'd survived those first nights, wondered if Eleanor had made a terrible mistake, or a brave one. On the 4th day, I rode out to Samuel Morrison's claim, the land Eleanor had come west to inherit. I told myself I was just checking on a patient, making sure the woman who'd married a stranger hadn't gotten herself killed. The truth was more complicated. I wanted to understand, needed to see what would become of such an unlikely union. The valley opened up before me around mid-morning, good bottomland, sheltered by ridges on 3 sides, a creek running clear and cold through the center. I could see why Morrison had claimed it, but there was no house, no cabin, just foundation stones half buried in grass, and a dugout shelter, someone's abandoned beginning. I found Eleanor kneeling by the creek, washing clothes, her sleeves rolled up, hair coming loose from its pins. She looked up at my approach, hand moving instinctively toward a rifle propped against a nearby rock. Then she recognized me, relaxed slightly. "Dr. Morrison," she said, "I didn't expect to see you again." "Thought I'd check on my patients," I said, dismounted. "Make sure you survived your first few days." A small smile. "We're still here." "And your husband?" She gestured toward the half-built dugout. I could hear the rhythmic sound of digging, steady, patient, the sound of hard work. "He's been at it since first light," Eleanor said, "expanding the shelter, making it livable before winter comes." I walked toward the dugout, found Jacob waist-deep in a trench he'd dug, shirtless in the heat, his skin bronzed and scarred, the shackles finally gone from his wrists, raw wounds where the metal had rubbed. He looked up at my approach, nodded once, not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. "I brought salve for those wrists," I said, "and some other supplies, thought you might need them." He climbed out of the trench, accepted the medical bag I offered, examined the contents with something like wonder, as if he'd forgotten what simple kindness looked like. "May I?" I gestured to his wrists. He held them out. "Let me clean and dress the wounds." Up close, I could see more scars. Years of them. This man had lived a hard life. "You're a blacksmith," I said, "or were. I can tell by your hands." He looked at me sharply, then nodded slowly. "Good trade, honest work." I finished bandaging his left wrist, started on the right. What brought you to the mountains? His jaw tightened, hands pulling away slightly, a clear signal. Don't ask. Fair enough, I said. We've all got pasts we'd rather leave buried. I finished the bandaging, stepped back. That shelter won't be enough for winter, you know that. He pointed to the foundation stones, then made building motions with his hands. He intended to build a proper house. With what tools? What materials? Jacob walked to where a collection of implements lay in the grass. A rusty saw, a hammer missing half its handle, some bent nails, the pitiful remnants of someone else's abandoned dream. That won't do it, I said. You'll need proper lumber, good nails, maybe some help. He shook his head firmly, pointed to himself, then to Eleanor. Just us. Proud, are you? I smiled slightly. Or afraid of owing debts? He didn't answer, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He'd been caged, chained, dependent on others' mercy. He wanted to build something himself, prove he could still create. I understood that. I spent the afternoon with them, helping where I could. Mostly I watched, observed. Jacob worked with the quiet intensity of a man who'd found purpose. Every nail driven straight. Every cut measured twice. He might have limited tools, but he had skill. That was clear. Eleanor worked beside him, learning. She didn't know how to build, but she was quick to understand, quick to anticipate what he needed. They'd developed a language already. Small gestures, glances, the kind of communication that comes from necessity. But there was more to it than that. I could see something growing between them. Not romance, not yet, but partnership, trust earned through shared labor. Around noon we stopped to eat. Eleanor had made a simple stew from vegetables she'd found growing wild, probably planted by Morrison before he disappeared. Do you know what happened to him? Eleanor asked me. Samuel Morrison, the man who brought me here. I shook my head. He arrived 6 months ago, started this claim. Then about 2 months back he just vanished. Some say he went back east. Others think he struck out for California. I paused. A few think he met with foul play. Eleanor looked at the foundation stones. He never built anything, just these stones. Some men are better at dreaming than doing, I said. Jacob stood abruptly, walked toward the foundation, stared down at the stones with an intensity that made Eleanor and me exchange glances. What is it? Eleanor asked. He knelt, ran his hands over the stones. His whole body had gone rigid, trembling slightly. I moved closer. Jacob, are you all right? He didn't respond, just kept staring at those stones. His breathing had changed, faster, shallower. Signs of distress I recognized from treating soldiers during the war. Eleanor knelt beside him. Jacob, what's wrong? He looked at her, and I saw something in his eyes that chilled me, recognition and horror. Then he stood, walked rapidly away from the foundation, toward the creek, stood there with his back to us, shoulders heaving. Did I do something wrong? Eleanor asked me quietly. No, I said, but those stones mean something to him, something painful. We gave him space. After a few minutes he returned, his face carefully blank, but I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he picked up his tools. Something about this land troubled him deeply. But what? I stayed until evening, then excused myself. I had patients back in Cedar Falls who needed checking. But as I rode away, I found myself thinking about Jacob's reaction, the way he'd looked at those foundation stones, like they were grave markers. Back in town, I stopped at the land office, asked to see the records for Morrison's claim. The clerk, a bored young man named Timothy, pulled out a dusty ledger. Morrison filed in March of this year, Timothy said. Paid his fees, started improvement work. And before Morrison? Timothy flipped back through the pages. Let's see. Claim was abandoned in 1871. Original claimant disappeared, presumed dead. Who was the original claimant? Timothy squinted at the faded writing. J. Brennan. First name illegible. Filed the claim in 1869. My heart skipped. Brennan? Yes, sir. Built a homestead there. Then, in 1871, the whole family disappeared. Raiders, most likely. Place was found empty. Blood evidence. Bodies never recovered. He closed the ledger. Sad story. But it happens out here. I rode back to Cedar Falls in a daze, pieces clicking together in my mind. J. Brennan. A blacksmith, probably. Josiah, maybe. Or Jacob. Jacob Stone. The name Eleanor had given him. Had she chosen randomly, or had something guided her? That land wasn't just any claim. It was Jacob's original homestead, the place where his family had died. He'd come home without knowing it. Or maybe he had known. Maybe that's why he'd been living in the mountains nearby, unable to leave, unable to return. And now Eleanor had brought him back, to build again on the ground where everything had been taken from him. Dear God, no wonder he'd look stricken. I debated whether to tell Eleanor. She deserved to know, but something held me back. If Jacob wanted her to know his past, he'd find a way to tell her. My job was to tend bodies, not open old wounds. But I would watch. I would visit regularly. Make sure this revelation didn't break him completely. Because I'd seen it happen before. Seen men confront their trauma too soon. Seen them shatter under the weight of memory. Jacob Stone, or Josiah Brennan, or whoever he'd been before grief silenced him, was walking a knife's edge between healing and collapse. And Eleanor, brave, foolish Eleanor, was walking it with him, not knowing the full truth, not understanding that she'd asked him to build a house on his family's grave. I made a decision then. I would help them, bring tools, materials, whatever they needed, not just as a doctor, but as a witness. Because sometimes the best medicine is simply to be present, to stand beside someone while they face the hardest thing they've ever done. And for Jacob, building on that land would be exactly that, the hardest thing. And maybe, if grace allowed, the most healing. I've learned something in my years of practicing medicine. The body heals from the outside in. A wound on the skin closes first. Then, deeper tissue knits together. Finally, if you're lucky, the bone or organ beneath recovers. But the soul? The soul heals from the inside out. You can't see it happening, can't measure it with instruments, or predict it with science. You only know healing has occurred when suddenly, one day, a person does something they couldn't do before. Speaks when they've been silent, reaches out when they've been withdrawn, builds when they've been broken. I watched Jacob Stone heal from the inside out that autumn. Watched Eleanor Hayes help him without quite knowing what she was doing. Sometimes the best healers are the ones who don't realize they're practicing medicine at all. I rode out to their valley twice a week through September, officially to check on their health, unofficially because I couldn't stay away. Something remarkable was happening in that place. Two damaged people learning to exist in the same space without breaking each other. That alone seemed miraculous. The work progressed slowly. Jacob had little to work with. Eleanor knew nothing about construction. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in determination. I brought what I could. Nails purchased with my own money. Some lumber from a barn demolition in Cedar Falls. Tools borrowed or traded for medical services. Judge O'Brien helped too, in his quiet way. Sent word through me that he had some window glass stored in his shed. "No use to me," he said. "My eyes are failing anyway. Might as well go to someone who'll appreciate them." Others contributed less openly. I'd find things left at the edge of their property. A coil of rope, some tar paper. Once a whole box of nails with no note attached. Not everyone in the territory feared Jacob Stone. Some people, it seemed, appreciated what Eleanor had done, or at least respected her courage enough to help anonymously. But Eleanor and Jacob did most of it themselves, day after day, sunrise to sunset, building their shelter into something that might actually keep them alive through winter, and in the process, building something else, something harder to name but just as essential. I arrived one afternoon in late September to find Eleanor struggling with a roof beam. Jacob was down at the creek hauling water. She'd decided to position the beam herself rather than wait. Foolish. but understandable. She was trying to prove she could contribute equally, that she wasn't a burden. I saw it happen from 50 yards away. The beam was too heavy, too awkward. It slipped from her grip, started to fall directly toward her head. I opened my mouth to shout a warning, but someone else was faster. "No!" The sound that came from Jacob's throat was raw, strangled, like something torn from deep inside him. Barely human, but unmistakably a word. Eleanor jumped backward. The beam crashed where her head had been a moment before. Would have killed her instantly. She stood there shaking, staring at the fallen timber. Jacob dropped the water buckets, ran. Not toward the beam, but toward Eleanor. He grabbed her shoulders, spun her to face him. His eyes wild with fear, his mouth worked, trying to form words, but only harsh breathing came out. The effort of that single shout had exhausted whatever small reserve of voice he'd managed. "I'm all right," Eleanor said. "I'm all right, Jacob. You saved me." He pulled her against his chest, held her there, his whole body trembling. From my vantage point, I could see his face over her shoulder. Eyes squeezed shut, jaw clenched, fighting something internal, some wall he'd built between himself and the world. That wall had just cracked. One word had escaped, and the effort of it had shaken him to his core. I approached slowly, deliberately making noise so I wouldn't startle them. They separated. Eleanor's face flushed. Jacob's carefully blank again. But I'd seen what I'd seen. "That was close," I said mildly. "Heavy beams require 2 people, Mrs. Stone." "I know that now," Eleanor said, her voice still shaky. "I just thought you thought wrong." I kept my tone gentle. Pride is a luxury you can't afford out here. When your partner says to wait, you wait. Jacob had turned away, walked several paces, stood with his back to us. His shoulders rose and fell with deep breaths. Eleanor watched him with concern. "He spoke," she said quietly. "Just one word, but I heard." "Do you think, can he speak? Has he been able to this whole time?" I shook my head. Trauma does strange things to the voice. Some men lose it completely. Others find it locked away, available only in moments of extreme need. I looked at Jacob's rigid back. Your life was in danger. That unlocked something. Will it come back, his voice? Maybe, maybe not. The question is whether he wants it to. Eleanor frowned. "Why wouldn't he?" "Because," I said softly, "sometimes silence is safer than speech. Sometimes a man goes quiet because words failed him when he needed them most. Because there's nothing left to say that matters." I thought of Margaret. How I'd talked and talked during her fever, tried every word I knew to comfort her, to explain what was happening, to promise she'd be fine. All lies, all useless. And when she died, I'd found myself with nothing to say for weeks after. What were words worth when they couldn't save the person you loved? Maybe Jacob understood that better than most. That evening, I stayed for supper. Eleanor had gotten better at frontier cooking. The stew was actually edible. We ate in comfortable silence. After Jacob pulled out a piece of charcoal from the fire, on a smooth plank of wood, he began to draw. I watched, fascinated. His hand moved with sure strokes, creating an image of the house as he envisioned it. Not the ramshackle shelter they had now, but something beautiful, a real home. He showed it to Eleanor, pointed to different features, a covered porch, multiple windows to catch light, a proper chimney, even decorative trim along the roofline. "It's lovely," Eleanor said. "But Jacob, we don't have materials for all this." He tapped the drawing, then pointed to his head, then his heart. I understood. "He's saying this is the dream. You build toward the dream even if you can't achieve it all at once." Jacob nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He handed the charcoal to Eleanor, gestured for her to draw. "Me? I can't draw," he insisted gently. Eleanor took the charcoal awkwardly, thought for a moment, then sketched something beside his house. A garden, simple lines indicating rows of plants, a fence to keep out deer. Jacob smiled. Actually smiled. The first time I'd seen that expression on his face. He took the charcoal back, added to her garden, a small structure. When Eleanor looked puzzled, he made a gesture like scattering grain. "A chicken coop?" she guessed. He nodded enthusiastically. They went back and forth like this for an hour, building their dream home on a piece of wood with charcoal, adding details, sometimes laughing when their drawings looked particularly crude. I watched them. These two people who'd met as strangers in a cage of shadow, now planning a future together, creating something from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. This was medicine too, maybe the most important kind. The days grew shorter. October arrived with cold mornings and the smell of coming winter. Jacob worked with increasing urgency. The walls were up now, the roof mostly complete. He'd managed to build a fireplace from river stones, crude but functional. Eleanor had made curtains from old flour sacks, filled mattress ticking with prairie grass, found wild herbs to hang from the rafters, small touches that turned shelter into home. They still slept carefully apart, each on their own side of the single room, a line of propriety drawn down the middle. But I noticed the distance shrinking, not physically but in other ways. The way Eleanor would touch Jacob's shoulder when passing, the way he'd steady her elbow when the ground was uneven. Small intimacies, building trust through touch. One afternoon I arrived to find Eleanor working on something at the table, a shirt. Not mending this time, but actual sewing. Creating something new from pieces of fabric she'd carefully saved. "For winter," she explained when she saw me looking. "His clothes are almost gone. I'm trying to make him something warm." Jacob was outside, working on the chicken coop they'd drawn together. Eleanor had bartered for 3 hens from a passing trader. They needed housing before the cold truly set in. "How are you managing?" I asked Eleanor. "Really?" She set down her sewing, considered the question. "Better than I expected. Harder than I hoped," she smiled slightly. "He's a good man, Doctor. Underneath everything, I see more of it every day." "And the silence? Does it bother you?" "Sometimes. I talk too much trying to fill it, ask questions I know he can't answer." She paused. "But then I remember. After James died, I couldn't speak for weeks. Everyone wanted answers, explanations, comfort. I had none to give." She picked up the shirt again. "Jacob doesn't demand anything from me, doesn't expect me to be anything but what I am. That's rare." Through the window, we could see Jacob hammering together the coop frame, moving with the careful precision of a craftsman. "He's been building longer than these few weeks," I observed. Eleanor looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" I'd debated telling her, but she deserved to know. I checked the land records. This claim, it wasn't always Morrison's. No, it was originally filed by a man named J. Brennan in 1869. He built a homestead here. Then, in 1871, he and his family disappeared. Raiders, most likely. Eleanor had gone very still. "Brennan. The records don't give a first name, but the timing fits. And Jacob's reaction to those foundation stones," I let the implication hang. "You think he's Brennan? That this was his land?" "I think it's possible." Eleanor stood, walked to the window, watched Jacob work. "That's why he looked so stricken. He recognized the foundation. This is where his family died." I finished quietly. "Yes." She pressed her hand against the glass. "And I asked him to build here, to make a home on his family's grave." "You didn't know. Does that make it better?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Doctor, if this is true, if I've brought him back to the worst moment of his life, then maybe that's exactly what he needs," I said. "Some wounds can't heal until you face them. Some ghosts need to be acknowledged before they'll rest." "Or maybe," Eleanor said softly, "I've made a terrible mistake." She confronted Jacob that evening. I'd left, but she told me about it later. After supper, she'd taken his hand, led him to the foundation stones, pointed to them, then to him, made a questioning gesture. He'd tried to pull away, but she held firm. "Was this yours?" she'd asked. "Was this your home? Your family's home?" For a long moment, nothing. Then slowly, he nodded. Eleanor told me she'd started crying then. Not loud, just quiet tears. "I'm so sorry," she'd said. "I didn't know. I wouldn't have asked you to build here if I'd known." Jacob had reached out, wiped her tears with his calloused thumb. Then he'd done something remarkable. He'd knelt by the foundation stones, placed both hands on them, closed his eyes. Eleanor said she'd watched him sit like that for maybe 10 minutes, just breathing. Remembering, probably. When he stood, his face was wet too, but he'd taken her hand, led her to where they'd been building, pointed to the new walls, the new roof. The message was clear. Yes, this was where his past had died, but it could also be where his future was born. He was choosing to build, despite the pain, despite the memories, maybe because of them. We needed supplies that Cedar Falls couldn't provide, tools Jacob couldn't fashion himself. So, in mid-October, they made their first trip to town together since the wedding. I rode with them, partly for company, partly because I worried about how people would react. Fallow Ridge had spread their story far and wide. The woman who married the wild man. Some versions painted Eleanor as a saint, others as a fool, most as something in between. Jacob was universally the monster, the beast, the thing in human form. Cedar Falls was more tolerant than Fallow Ridge, but tolerance only stretched so far. We arrived around noon, tied our horses outside Henderson's general store. Eleanor straightened her bonnet, took a breath. "Ready?" I asked. "No," she admitted, "but we're going anyway." Inside, the store went quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to Jacob. He stood very still, made himself small despite his size, head slightly bowed, hands visible. Everything about his posture said, "I am not a threat." Mr. Henderson came around from behind the counter, older man, shrewd eyes. He'd been running this store for 20 years, seen every kind of person the frontier produced. "Mrs. Stone," he said politely. "Dr. Morrison." Then, after a pause, "Mr. Stone." The simple courtesy of using Jacob's name, treating him as a man rather than a thing, made Eleanor's shoulders relax slightly. "We need supplies," Eleanor said. "I have a list." Henderson took it, scanned the items. "I can fill most of this. Some things I'll need to order from Denver. Take a few weeks." "That's fine. We're not going anywhere." While Henderson gathered their order, other customers kept their distance. But I noticed something. The fear was less than I'd expected, more curiosity than hostility. A woman whispered to her companion, "That's him, the one from Fallow Ridge? Don't look like much, does he? Quiet, as they say?" Then it happened. The thing that would shift everything. An elderly man entered the store, moving slow, leaning heavy on a cane. The cane's handle was wrapped in cloth, makeshift repair that wasn't holding. The man made it 3 steps before the cane gave way completely, snapped clean through. He pitched forward, would have fallen hard on the wooden floor, but Jacob moved, faster than I'd seen him move before. He caught the old man under the arms, steadied him, held him upright until he found his balance. "Lord have mercy," the old man gasped. "Thank you, son. That would have broken my hip for certain." Jacob helped him to a chair, knelt down, examined the broken cane. The repair job had been poor, just cloth wrapped around a split that went to the core. He looked up at Henderson, pointed to some items on a shelf, raised his eyebrows in question. "You want to fix it?" Henderson asked. Jacob nodded. "Go ahead." We all watched as Jacob selected a leather strip, some small nails, and a metal bracket. Working at Henderson's counter with swift, sure movements, he reinforced the split wood, created a stronger joint, wrapped the handle with leather for a better grip. Within minutes, he handed the restored cane back to the old man. The fellow tested it, his face brightening. "Why, it's better than new, steadier, and the grip doesn't hurt my hand." He reached for his purse. "What do I owe you?" Jacob shook his head, stepped back, pointed to Henderson. "No charge, Mr. Brewster," Henderson said slowly, watching Jacob with new interest. "Consider it a demonstration of what good help can do." After Brewster left, still marveling over his cane, Henderson turned to Eleanor. "Your husband, he's a craftsman." "Blacksmith," Eleanor said. "Farrier, too. Very skilled." Henderson looked at Jacob, then at the pile of broken tools in the corner, things customers had brought in that Henderson couldn't fix himself. "I've been needing help," Henderson said carefully. "My back's not what it was. Hard to lift stock, make deliveries." He paused. "But also need someone who can repair things. Lots of folks bring me broken items. I have to turn them away." Eleanor glanced at Jacob. His face was carefully neutral, but I saw hope flicker in his eyes. "He doesn't speak," Eleanor said, "but he understands everything, follows directions perfectly, and his work speaks for itself." Henderson nodded slowly. 3 days a week? $1.50 per day, plus he can take home any damaged goods he can repair. Eleanor looked at Jacob, raising her eyebrows. "Your choice?" He nodded, slowly, then offered his hand to Henderson. The storekeeper shook it. "Start Monday?" Another nod. Just like that, Jacob Stone had employment, had a place in the community beyond the beast Eleanor married. As we loaded our purchases, I noticed people watching differently. Less fear, more assessment, the kind of looks you give a new neighbor, someone you're trying to figure out. We'd made progress today, small but significant. The ride home was quiet, but a different kind of quiet, companionable, even hopeful. That evening, as the sun set behind the western peaks, Eleanor and Jacob sat on what would eventually be their porch. Just 2 chairs positioned to watch the light change. I sat with them. None of us speaking. No need for words. In the valley below, their chickens clucked in their new coop. Inside the house, curtains moved in the breeze through actual windows. Smoke rose from their chimney. Small victories, each one hard-won. Eleanor had pulled out that charcoal drawing of their dream house, compared it to what they'd built. Not the same. Not yet, but closer than it had been. "We're going to make it," she said, speaking to herself more than us. "We're actually going to make it through winter." Jacob reached over, took her hand, squeezed once. Words weren't always necessary. Sometimes a touch said everything, but peace never lasts long on the frontier. 3 days later, I was in Cedar Falls when I heard the news. Marcus Garrett had been seen riding toward Jacob's Valley, and he hadn't been alone. I saddled my horse immediately, rode hard toward their homestead, praying I wouldn't arrive too late, praying that the fragile peace we'd built wouldn't shatter before it had a chance to set. I found them in the narrow canyon that led to their valley, the only road in or out. 3 riders blocked the path, Marcus Garrett in the center, 2 ranch hands flanking him, all armed. Eleanor and Jacob sat on their wagon, supplies from Henderson's store loaded in back. No weapons visible except Jacob's farrier's knife, barely more than a tool. Jacob had positioned himself between Eleanor and the riders, his body language clear, protective, but not aggressive. I rode up fast, made sure my presence was noted. "Garrett," I said, kept my voice level. "Didn't expect to see you this far north." "Dr. Morrison." Marcus didn't take his eyes off Jacob. "Just having a conversation with our friend here." "Looks more like a blockade to me." "Call it what you like. I've got questions need answering." I maneuvered my horse between the 2 groups. "Then ask them, but do it civilized." Garrett's jaw worked. He was a big man, maybe 45, used to getting his way, but he wasn't stupid. Hurting a doctor would bring more trouble than he wanted. "Fine," he said. "Mr. Stone, or Brennan, or whatever your real name is." His voice was tight with controlled rage. "You killed my brother. I want to know why." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't respond, couldn't respond. "Nothing to say?" Garrett pressed. "Same as always, hide behind that convenient silence." "He can't speak," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear I heard underneath. "But I can. What do you want to know?" "I want to know if Tom suffered. I want to know if he begged. I want to know if this creature showed any mercy before he took my brother's life." Eleanor looked at Jacob. He met her eyes. Some wordless communication passed between them. Then Jacob did something that surprised everyone. Moving slowly, deliberately, he reached into his shirt, pulled out something on a leather cord. the carved wooden horse, the toy I'd seen before. He held it where Garrett could see it, then pointed to himself, made a cradling motion, the universal gesture for child. "You had children," I said quietly. "Understanding." Jacob nodded, held up 2 fingers, then made a gesture indicating they were gone. "Dead." Marcus Garrett stared, some of the rage draining from his face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Eleanor said, "he understands grief. He knows what it's like to lose family. He's not asking you to forgive, just to understand that he didn't kill your brother out of malice." "Then why?" Garrett demanded. "Why was Tom dead when we found him?" Jacob reached into the wagon bed, pulled out the piece of charcoal Eleanor used for writing shopping lists, found a smooth board. He began to draw, quick, economical strokes. 2 figures, one approaching the other. The approaching figure holding what was clearly a weapon. The other figure, smaller, with hands raised. He pointed to the smaller figure, then to himself. "Self-defense," I said. "Tom came at him armed." "Lie." Garrett surged his horse forward, but his companions grabbed the reins. "Marcus," one of them said, "let him finish." Jacob drew more. The second figure, Tom, on the ground. The first figure, Jacob, kneeling beside him. Jacob drew himself, covering his face with his hands. Sorrow, not triumph. The universal gesture of grief. Then he drew something else. A cave. And around it, multiple small figures, items scattered. He pointed to Tom, made a digging motion, a searching motion. "What was Tom looking for?" Eleanor asked gently. Jacob drew coins, lots of them. A treasure. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, one of Garrett's men spoke. "Marcus, you need to hear this." "Shut up, Dale." "No, you need to hear it." Dale shifted in his saddle. "Tom had debts, bad ones. He'd been talking about the hermit in the mountains, about gold supposedly hidden up there." Garrett's face had gone pale. "That's not... Tom wouldn't..." "He would," Dale said quietly. "I'm sorry, but he would. He was desperate, owed money to some dangerous men. He'd heard stories about the wild man's treasure. He went up there looking for it." Jacob drew more, himself defending. Tom falling, Jacob finding papers on Tom's body, a map, marked locations of caves. "He came to rob you," I said. Jacob nodded slowly. Marcus Garrett sat very still, the truth settling over him like lead. His brother, his respected, upstanding brother, had gone into the mountains to rob a hermit. Had drawn first, had died trying to steal from a man who had nothing. "You're lying," Garrett said, but there was no conviction in it. Eleanor spoke then, her voice gentle. "Mr. Garrett, my first husband was killed by men who wanted his land. They shot him in the back, called it an accident. The law did nothing because the killers were respected men with friends." She paused. "I know it's hard to accept that someone you love could be wrong, but holding on to a false story doesn't honor their memory. It just adds more lies to the world." Garrett looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, saw something in her face that made him falter. "Tom had debts," Dale said again. "We found his papers after he died, letters from creditors. He was going to lose the ranch, Marcus. He was desperate." Garrett's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "He never told me, never asked for help. Pride," Dale said. "Same pride that killed him." Jacob set down the charcoal. Then he did something remarkable. He climbed down from the wagon, walked slowly toward Garrett. No sudden movements, just steady progress. He stopped a few feet away, knelt in the dust, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. He looked up at Garrett, pressed his hands together, then separated them. The gesture clear. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this. But I couldn't let him kill me." Garrett stared down at this silent man. This beast everyone feared, kneeling in the road, offering what little comfort he could. "Get up," Garrett said roughly. "Get up, damn you." Jacob rose slowly, met Garrett's eyes. "You could have killed him and said nothing," Garrett said. "Let everyone think he died checking traps. Saved his reputation, his family's honor." Jacob shook his head, pointed to himself. then made a gesture toward his heart, then shook his head again. He's saying he couldn't lie, I translated. Even to spare Tom's family, truth matters more than comfort. Garrett's hands tightened on his reins. He looked like he wanted to do violence, wanted to put a bullet in Jacob and ride away. But he didn't. I should kill you, he said instead. Should put a bullet in you right now. Tom was my brother. Blood. Jacob stood still, waiting. If Garrett wanted to shoot, Jacob wouldn't run. The moment stretched, tight as a bowstring. Then Garrett lowered his gun. But Dale's right. Tom made his choice. Went up there looking for easy money. Got himself killed. He looked at Jacob with something that might have been grudging respect. You defended yourself. Law allows that, even for men like you. He turned his horse. You stay away from my land. Stay away from my family. We're done here. Mr. Garrett, Eleanor called out. He paused, looked back. Thank you, she said simply, for listening, for seeing the truth. Garrett's face worked. Don't thank me. I'm not forgiving him. I'm just, he stopped, just trying to do right by Tom's memory, even if that means accepting he wasn't the man I thought. He rode away, his men following, leaving Eleanor and Jacob alone on the road. Jacob sagged against the wagon, the strength going out of him all at once. Eleanor was beside him immediately. Are you all right? He nodded, but his hands were shaking. I dismounted, checked him over. No injuries, but he's had a shock. We should get him home. We made the rest of the journey in silence. Jacob sitting beside Eleanor on the wagon seat now, not behind her, beside her. At their homestead, Eleanor helped him inside, made him sit, brought him water. I watched them. The way she touched his shoulder, the way he leaned into that touch slightly. Not much, but enough. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, Eleanor said, kneeling before him like that, offering comfort to a man who wanted you dead. Jacob looked up at her, his gray eyes tired, old. He reached for the charcoal, wrote on a scrap of wood. Understood his grief, know what losing family feels like. Eleanor read it, then knelt beside him, took his hands. Tell me, she said gently. Tell me about them, your family. For a long moment Jacob just looked at her. Then he picked up the charcoal again. Mary, age 6, loved horses. David, age 4, quiet like me. Wife Sarah, died giving birth to 3rd child. Baby died too. 2 years later, raiders came. He set down the charcoal, couldn't write more, but he pulled out the carved horse, held it out to Eleanor. Mary made this, she asked. He shook his head, pointed to himself, then made a gesture indicating small, young. You made it when you were young? Nod. And you gave it to Mary? Another nod. Then he mimed the baby, the one who'd died with Sarah. You gave it to the baby who didn't survive? Yes. And Mary kept it, to remember her little brother or sister. Jacob's eyes closed. Tears leaked out. He'd been carrying this toy for 5 years, a remembrance of 3 deaths, wife, unborn child, and eventually Mary, who'd kept the toy safe until raiders killed her. Eleanor pulled him against her, let him cry. The first time he'd wept in front of another person in God knew how long. I slipped outside, gave them privacy. Some griefs are too private for witnesses, even well-meaning ones. I found Eleanor outside later. Jacob had fallen asleep in the chair, exhausted by emotion. He told you everything, I said. Most of it. What he could bear to write. She looked at the mountains. His wife died in childbirth. He raised Mary and David alone for 2 years. Then raiders came. He was at the forge, heard Mary scream. By the time he got there, she didn't finish. Didn't need to. He's been punishing himself, I said. The silence, the isolation, living in a cave like an animal. All of it punishment for not saving them. I know. And you're still here, still building a life with him. Eleanor looked at me. Doctor, have you ever failed someone you loved? Failed them so completely that every breath afterward felt like theft? I thought of Margaret, how I couldn't save her. Yes. Then you know, Jacob needs someone who understands that feeling, who won't tell him to just move on, just forget. She turned back to the mountains. I can't replace his children, can't erase his grief, but I can stand beside him while he carries it, and maybe that's enough. More than enough, I said quietly. That's what love is, Eleanor, not fixing each other, just bearing witness while the other person heals. She smiled slightly. Is that your medical opinion, doctor? No, just something an old man has learned through losing his own wife. We stood in comfortable silence. Inside, Jacob slept. Outside, evening fell over the valley. Tomorrow he would work at Henderson's store, would begin integrating into Cedar Falls community, would take another step toward reclaiming his place in the world. But tonight, he rested, guarded by a woman brave enough to marry a stranger, patient enough to wait for him to find his voice. And slowly, so slowly you could barely measure it, he was healing from the inside out. The soul's way, the only way that mattered. I left them as the sun touched the western peaks, rode back toward Cedar Falls under a sky turning purple and gold. Behind me, smoke rose from their chimney. A light appeared in their window. The simple comforts of home. They would make it through winter. I was certain of that now. What I wasn't certain of was what would come after. Marcus Garrett had ridden away, but not everyone would be so understanding. Not everyone would accept the truth. And there were other threats on the frontier, other dangers besides vengeful brothers. Winter was coming, hard and cold. It would test them in ways they couldn't anticipate. But they had each other now, had built something stronger than just walls and a roof. They'd built trust, partnership, the beginning of something that might, with time and grace, become love. I thought of Margaret, how I'd give anything for one more winter with her, one more season of shared warmth against the cold. Eleanor and Jacob had that chance, had the gift of time together. However much the frontier allowed, I prayed they'd use it well. The wind picked up as I rode, carrying the smell of snow from the high peaks. Winter was indeed coming, and with it, trials that would test whether what Eleanor and Jacob had built could withstand more than just the weather. But that story would have to wait for another telling. For now, I headed home to my empty house, to my medical books and memories, grateful at least to have witnessed something rare. Two broken people learning to be whole together. Sometimes that's all the miracle you get, and sometimes it's enough. Winter came to the Colorado high country like a wolf circling its prey. First, a warning. Frost on the windows, ice forming at the creek's edge. Then the pounce, snow falling in sheets, wind howling through the valley like something alive and hungry. Eleanor and Jacob were ready, or as ready as anyone could be. The house stood complete. Not the dream they'd drawn in charcoal, but solid. Real. 4 walls, a roof that didn't leak, windows that let in light but kept out wind, a fireplace that drew properly, filling the single room with warmth. They'd stocked what provisions they could, dried beans, salted meat, flour and cornmeal from Henderson's store, enough to see them through till spring, barring catastrophe. Jacob worked 3 days a week in Cedar Falls now, fixing broken tools, hauling freight, making himself useful. The town had accepted him, if not warmly, then at least without hostility. He was Eleanor's man, the silent blacksmith who did good work and kept to himself. People had seen worse. Eleanor spent her days making their house livable, sewing, cooking, learning the 100 small skills of frontier housekeeping. She'd been a town woman in Ohio. Out here, she had to learn everything fresh. But she was learning, getting stronger, more capable. They'd settled into a rhythm, the two of them. A domestic partnership that worked because neither expected more than the other could give. Until the night the winters came. It was mid-November, a Tuesday, the first real blizzard of the season howling outside their windows. Eleanor was mending by lamplight. Jacob was working on a bridle he'd been commissioned to make. Extra income for spring. The pounding on the door came sudden and desperate. Jacob was there first, pulled it open to reveal Tom Winters, snow-covered and wild-eyed. "Doctor," Tom gasped. "I need the doctor. Sarah, the baby's coming. Too early. Something's wrong." Eleanor was already moving. "Dr. Morrison is in Cedar Falls. 20 miles in this storm? I know, Tom said, his voice breaking. I rode there first. He's coming, but the snow, he said he'd be hours. Sarah can't wait hours. Eleanor looked at Jacob. He was already reaching for his coat. Bring her here, Eleanor said. We have a bed, warm fire. I'll do what I can until the doctor arrives. Tom nearly collapsed with relief. Wagon's just outside. I wrapped her in every blanket we own, but Jacob was already past him, moving into the storm. Between the two men, they carried Sarah Winters inside. She was pale as death, sweating despite the cold, her belly huge and tight. Eleanor, she gasped. Thank God, I'm so frightened. I know. Eleanor helped them settle Sarah on the bed. Tom, I need you to stoke the fire higher. Jacob, hot water, lots of it, and clean cloths. Both men moved to obey, grateful for direction, for something to do besides watch and worry. Eleanor had attended births in Ohio. It was expected of women, especially in small communities. But never had she been the only help. Never had someone's life depended entirely on her knowing what to do. She examined Sarah as best she could. The baby was coming, that much was clear, whether it was ready or not. How far apart are the pains? Eleanor asked. Close, Sarah panted. Every few minutes now. Too fast, too soon. This baby wanted out and wouldn't wait for doctor or good timing. Jacob brought water, set it by the fire to stay warm. Then he retreated to the far corner, put his back to the room, gave the women privacy. But Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his knees, could see him fighting something internal. She understood. He'd been through this before, his wife dying in childbirth, the baby dying with her, leaving him with 2 small children and a grief that eventually silenced him. Jacob, Eleanor called gently, I need you. He turned slightly, questioning. I need someone strong, someone steady. Sarah needs support during the hard pains. Tom's too frightened. You're not. It wasn't entirely true. Jacob was terrified. She could see it. But he was also disciplined, could function through fear. He came, positioned himself behind Sarah, let her grip his arms when the contractions came. His presence solid, unshakable. Tom paced, muttered prayers, jumped at every sound. The hours crawled past. Sarah labored. Eleanor did what she could, encouraged, reassured, prayed silently that the doctor would arrive, but the storm showed no sign of letting up, and the baby showed no sign of waiting. Around midnight, Sarah's water broke. The contractions came harder, faster. Eleanor had seen enough births to know this was it. The baby was coming now. Sarah, when the next pain comes, you need to push. Understand? Sarah nodded, too exhausted for words. The contraction built. Sarah bore down, screamed. Jacob held her steady, his face a mask, but Eleanor could see the memories playing behind his eyes. Another woman, another labor, another night when everything went wrong. Again, Eleanor urged. You're doing beautifully. Again, Sarah pushed. Again, and again, and again. Then, finally, a head appeared. Dark hair plastered to a tiny skull. One more, Eleanor said. One more big push, and, Sarah screamed, pushed with everything she had. The baby slipped free into Eleanor's waiting hands. For a terrible moment, nothing. The infant was blue, silent, not breathing. Eleanor's mind went blank with panic. Then training kicked in. She cleared the baby's mouth, rubbed its back vigorously, prayed. Come on, breathe, please breathe. A cough, a sputter. Then, blessed sound, a wail. The baby's color shifted from blue to pink, lungs filling with air, voice announcing its arrival to the world. A girl, Eleanor laughed. Tears streaming down her face. You have a daughter, Sarah, a beautiful, perfect daughter. Tom was crying. Sarah was crying. Eleanor was crying. Jacob had turned away, but not before Eleanor saw his face, saw the tears there too. Eleanor cleaned the baby, wrapped her in soft cloth, placed her in Sarah's arms. The new mother looked down at her child with wonder. She's so small. She's early, Eleanor said, but strong. Listen to those lungs. The baby was indeed making her presence known, crying with impressive volume. "What will you name her?" Eleanor asked. Sarah looked at Tom, at Eleanor, then at Jacob, still standing with his back turned. "Hope," Sarah said. "Her name is Hope." It was perfect. After a night of fear and pain, Hope had arrived, small and red-faced and alive. Tom knelt beside the bed, touched his daughter's tiny hand. "Hope Eleanor Stone Winters," he said, looking at Eleanor. "If that's all right, we want her to carry your name for what you've done." Eleanor couldn't speak, could only nod. Behind them, Jacob made a sound. Not words, just a broken exhale. Eleanor turned, saw him gripping the wall, shoulders heaving, silent sobs racking his body. She understood. This was what he'd lost, this moment of joy and new life. His wife had died in labor, his child with her. He'd never gotten to hold that third baby, never heard it cry. "Jacob," Eleanor said softly, "would you like to hold her?" He shook his head violently, backed away. "Please," Sarah said, "you helped bring her into the world. You should be the first man besides Tom to hold her." Jacob looked at Sarah, at the tiny bundle in her arms, war playing across his face. Finally he moved forward, slowly, as if approaching something that might shatter. Sarah held out the baby, support her head. Jacob's large, scarred hands took the infant with surprising gentleness, cradled her against his chest. The baby quieted immediately, stopped crying, just looked up at this strange, silent man with dark, unfocused eyes. Jacob stared down at her, his face transforming, all the hardness, all the grief. For just a moment, it fell away, revealing the man he'd been before loss broke him. A father, a man who'd once held his own children like this. He stood there for long minutes, just holding baby Hope, letting her tiny fist wrap around his finger, feeling her breathe against his chest. Then carefully, reverently, he handed her back to Sarah. He turned to Eleanor. His lips moved, formed words without sound. "Thank you." Dr. Morrison arrived an hour later, battled through the storm on horseback. He examined Sarah and the baby, declared both healthy, if tired. "You did well," he told Eleanor. "Better than well. You saved 2 lives tonight." Eleanor felt the weight of it then, how close it had been, how easily it could have gone wrong. She stepped outside, needed air despite the cold, found Jacob there, standing in the falling snow, letting it coat him white. "That was brave," Eleanor said. "Helping. I know it must have brought back." He turned to her, and she saw his face clearly in the lamplight spilling from the window. He was crying, had been crying, still was, but he was also smiling. It was the first time she'd seen that expression, sorrow and joy mixed together. The face of someone remembering loss, but choosing to celebrate new life anyway. He reached out, pulled her into an embrace, the first time he'd initiated such contact. Eleanor felt his heart pounding against her cheek, felt the strength in his arms, the warmth of another human being choosing connection despite fear. They stood like that while snow fell around them, 2 people who'd both lost so much, finding comfort in shared survival. Inside, a baby cried, new life asserting itself against the dark and cold. Outside, 2 damaged souls held each other. Not lovers, not yet, but something deeper. Partners who'd faced death together and come through to the other side. The Winters family stayed 3 days, until Sarah was strong enough to travel, until the storm passed and the roads became passable again. In that time, something shifted in the small house. It became a home, not just for Eleanor and Jacob, but for all of them. A place where people gathered, where stories were told and laughter happened, where life continued despite hardship. Sarah nursed her baby. Tom fussed and worried. Jacob worked on his bridal commission. Eleanor cooked and cleaned and marveled at how normal it all felt. On the second night, after everyone else was asleep, Jacob pulled out his charcoal, drew something and showed it to Eleanor, a woman, a man, 2 small figures between them. His family, the one he'd lost. Eleanor studied it. "Tell me about them, please." Jacob hesitated, then picked up the charcoal again, began to write. "Sarah, my wife. Gentle, loved to sing. Mary, 6 years old. Fearless, wanted to be a blacksmith like Papa. David, 4, quiet. Loved books, would sit for hours listening to stories." He paused, then wrote more. "Sarah died giving birth to 3rd child. Boy, he died too. Never got to name him. I raised Mary and David alone. 2 years. Thought I was managing. Then raiders came. I was at Forge. Heard Mary scream. Ran. His hand shook. The charcoal broke. He picked up another piece. Found them in the house. Mary and David. Raiders had—" He couldn't write it. Set down the charcoal, covered his face. Eleanor touched his shoulder. "You don't have to tell me. Not if it hurts too much." But he shook his head, picked up the charcoal again, buried them behind the house. 3 graves, wife, baby, and the children. Tried to stay. Couldn't. Everything reminded me. Went to town, tried to start over. People said I was cursed, bringing death. Someone tried to hang me, said I'd killed my family myself, that I was possessed. Ran to mountains, stopped speaking. What was the point? Words couldn't save them, couldn't bring them back. 5 years alone, living like animal, waiting to die. Then you came." He looked at Eleanor, his gray eyes wet but clear. "You saw me, not monster, not beast, just man, broken man. Thank you." Eleanor took the charcoal from his hand, wrote beneath his words, "You saved me too, from becoming bitter, from letting injustice break me. We saved each other." Jacob read it, then did something he'd never done before. He spoke. Not one word, not a strangled shout, but actual speech, rough, halting, but unmistakable. "Yes," he said, his voice like rust and gravel. "We did." Eleanor's breath caught. "Jacob, you spoke." He nodded, touched his throat, tried again. "Hard, but—" "Want to, for you." 3 sentences, more than he'd managed in 5 years. Eleanor reached out, took his face in her hands. "Take your time. No rush. I'll wait." He smiled then, that rare, transforming expression. "Good," he said, "because have much to say." The winters left on the 4th day. The roads cleared. Sarah strong enough, baby Hope thriving. As they prepared to go, Sarah pulled Eleanor aside. "You're going to be a wonderful mother someday," she said. Eleanor's smile faltered. "I don't know if that's possible. After I lost—" She stopped. She'd never told anyone about the miscarriage after James died. "Lost what?" Sarah asked gently. "I was pregnant when James died. The shock. I lost the baby. The doctor said I might not be able to carry a child to term." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Doctors are wrong sometimes. But even if they're not, look at what you did for me, for Hope. Motherhood comes in many forms, Eleanor. You're already mothering half this valley." After they left, Eleanor found herself thinking about Sarah's words, about children, about what kind of future she and Jacob might build. She'd married him to save his life. But somewhere along the way, this had become real, this partnership, this carefully built trust. Could it become more? Should it? She didn't have answers, only questions, and a growing sense that something was shifting between them, something neither of them quite knew how to name. Spring came late that year. Winter held on with bitter claws, but finally in early April, the snow began to melt. The creek swelled with runoff. Green shoots pushed through brown earth. Jacob and Eleanor had survived their first winter together, not just survived, thrived. The house stood solid. They had food left over, money saved from Jacob's work at Henderson's store. They'd made it. I rode out to visit them on the first truly warm day. Found them working in what would be their garden, turning soil, planning what to plant. They looked different, both of them. Stronger, more settled, the way people do when they've weathered hardship together and come through intact. Jacob saw me first, stood, waved, actually waved. the gesture of someone comfortable in their own skin. "Dr. Morrison," Eleanor called. "Perfect timing. I just made fresh bread." We sat on their porch. They'd finally built the covered section they'd drawn months ago and ate warm bread with butter. Simple food, but it tasted like victory. "You're speaking more," I observed to Jacob. "Trying," he said, his voice still rough, still halting, but present. "Eleanor helps. Patient. With me." "He's doing wonderfully," Eleanor said, pride clear in her voice. "Whole sentences now. Sometimes even jokes." "Jokes?" I raised an eyebrow. Jacob's eyes crinkled. "Bad ones, but—" She laughs. Anyway, I watched them. The easy way they moved around each other, the small touches, the shared glances. This was more than partnership now. Anyone could see it. "There's something I need to tell you both," I said. "It's something I've been sitting on for months, but I think it's time you knew the whole truth." Eleanor set down her bread. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just significant." I pulled out the papers I'd brought. Land records, old newspapers. "This land, your land, I told you before it was originally claimed by J. Brennan." Jacob had gone very still. "I've done more research since then, found more records." I spread the papers on the small table between us. Josiah Brennan, that was the full name, filed claim in 1869. Built a homestead, married Sarah Brennan in 1870, had 2 children, Mary and David. Eleanor was reading the papers, her face growing pale. "Jacob, this is—" "Me," Jacob said, his voice barely above whisper. "My family." "In 1871 there was a raid," I continued. "Comanche, according to reports. The homestead was attacked. Sarah Brennan and 2 children were killed. Josiah Brennan disappeared. Presumed dead." I pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. "But there's more. In 1872, a man matching Josiah Brennan's description appeared in a town 50 miles north. Tried to start a blacksmith shop, but people said he was cursed, that he'd brought death to his family through some sin." Jacob's hands had clenched into fists. "Someone tried to hang him," I said quietly. "Accused him of killing his own family. He escaped. Disappeared into the mountains. That's the last official record of Josiah Brennan." "Until Fallow Ridge," Eleanor said. "Until they found him in that cave." "Yes." The silence stretched. Jacob sat very still, looking at those papers, at the record of his former life laid out in black and white. "This land," Eleanor said slowly, "Morrison's claim. It was actually Jacob's original homestead," I finished. "When he disappeared, it was declared abandoned. Eventually Morrison filed on it, but the foundation stones, the clearing, that was all Jacob's work. From before." Eleanor turned to Jacob. "You knew when we arrived. You recognized it." He nodded slowly. "Why didn't you tell me? Why let me think we were building something new when we were actually—" She stopped, understanding dawning. "We were rebuilding. On purpose." "Yes," Jacob said, his voice stronger now. "Couldn't run anymore. Couldn't let fear win." He stood, walked to the edge of the porch, looked out over the valley. When he spoke again, his words came more easily than I'd ever heard. "I built this house, the first time, with Sarah. Raised our children here, was happy." He turned back, tears on his face but voice steady. "Then raiders came, killed them all. In that house I couldn't stay, couldn't breathe. Ran to mountains, wanted to die." He looked at Eleanor. "Then you came, saw me, in cage, didn't see monster, saw broken man, offered life." He moved toward her, knelt beside her chair. "You brought me here, didn't know it was my land, but I knew. Moment I saw foundation, knew this was where I had to choose." "Choose what?" Eleanor whispered. "Life," Jacob said, "or death. Stay broken, or try again." He took her hands. "I chose life, chose building, chose you." Eleanor was crying now. "Jacob, I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "No," he said firmly. "If you knew, you wouldn't have asked. Would have protected me from pain." He smiled slightly. But pain was necessary. Had to face it. Had to come back to where it happened. Only way to heal. He gestured to the valley, the house, the garden they'd been planting. Built new life on old foundation. Can't forget them. Sarah, Mary, David, baby. Never named, but can honor them. By living, by building, by loving again. He looked directly at Eleanor. "If you'll have me, real marriage, not just partnership. Real love." Eleanor stared at him. "Are you asking—" "Yes," Jacob said. "Asking if you could love broken blacksmith with ugly past and scars." "You foolish man," Eleanor said, laughing through tears. "I already do, have for months. I just didn't think you wanted— I thought you still loved—" "Will always love Sarah," Jacob said honestly. "First love, mother of my children. But heart has room for you too." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring, simple iron band, hand-forged. "Made this in Henderson's forge. Asked him to keep secret." Jacob's hands shook slightly. "Not gold, not fancy, but strong. Won't break, like us." Eleanor held out her hand. Let him slide the ring onto her finger beside the one she'd given him that day in Fallow Ridge. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Jacob Brennan, or Jacob Stone, or whoever you choose to be, yes." He pulled her up, into his arms, kissed her for the first time. I looked away, gave them privacy. When they separated, both were smiling. That rare expression that comes when joy and sorrow mix. When you acknowledge loss, but choose hope anyway. "One more thing," I said. "There's something buried behind the house. 3 graves. Your wife and children." Jacob nodded. "I know. Visited them last week. First time since I left. Told them about Eleanor. About new life. Think they'd be happy." "We'll tend the graves," Eleanor said. "Plant flowers. Make sure they're honored." "Thank you," Jacob said, "to both of us. For telling truth. For standing with me. For everything." He looked at the valley again. "This land but has seen death, and life, loss, and hope. Now, new beginning." He turned back to Eleanor, took her face in his hands. "Love you," he said, clear as a bell. "Eleanor Stone, love you." "I love you too," Eleanor said. And standing there on that porch, on land that had seen so much sorrow, 2 people chose each other, fully, finally, without reservation. I left them soon after. They needed time alone, time to process everything that had been revealed, time to begin their marriage properly. As I rode away, I found myself thinking about healing, how it's never simple, never clean, how sometimes you have to return to the place of your deepest wound before you can truly move forward. Jacob had done that, had built a house on his family's grave, had faced his worst memories and chosen to create new ones. That took a courage I wasn't sure I possessed. My own wife's grave sat in Cedar Falls Cemetery. I visited once a week, left flowers, spoke to the stone, but I'd never really faced it, never let myself feel the full weight of losing her. I'd buried it under work, under duty, under the daily demands of frontier medicine. Maybe Jacob and Eleanor were teaching me something about the necessity of grief, about the courage required to love again despite loss. I was nearly back to Cedar Falls when I saw the rider, coming fast from the east, mail courier by the look of his saddlebags. He pulled up when he saw me. "Dr. Morrison?" "Yes." "Got mail for Eleanor Stone. Figured I'd deliver it to you since you're headed back from their place." He handed me a letter. Official envelope. Return address, Office of the Prosecutor, Coshocton County, Ohio. My stomach sank. I knew what this was, had been dreading it. "I'll make sure she gets it," I said. The courier tipped his hat, rode on toward Cedar Falls. I sat there holding that letter, knowing it would change everything. Knowing Eleanor would have to make a choice between the past and the future, between justice for her first husband and peace with her second. The timing couldn't be worse. She and Jacob had just committed to each other, just begun to build something real. And now this. I thought about not delivering it, losing it somehow. But Eleanor deserved the truth, deserved the choice. I turned my horse around, rode back toward their valley. They needed to know, both of them, before this became something they couldn't face together. I found them by Sarah's grave. Jacob had cleared the area. Eleanor had planted wildflower seeds. They stood hand in hand, saying goodbye to the past, making peace with it. I hated to interrupt, but the letter felt heavy in my pocket, a weight that needed sharing. "Eleanor," I called, "there's something you need to see." She turned, saw my expression, knew immediately something was wrong. I handed her the letter. She read the return address, her face going pale. "What is it?" Jacob asked, his speech clearer now that emotion sharpened it. "It's from Ohio," Eleanor said. "From the prosecutor. The men who killed James. They've been arrested for another murder. He wants me to testify." She opened the letter with trembling hands, read quickly. "They need me to return, to give testimony about James's death. With my statement, they can prove a pattern, get justice finally." She looked up at Jacob. "He says if I don't come, they'll likely go free. The evidence isn't strong enough without my testimony." Jacob took the letter, read it himself, his jaw tightening. "When?" he asked. "Trial's in 6 weeks. I'd need to leave soon to get there in time." The silence stretched, heavy, awful. "You should go," Jacob said finally. "Jacob, I can't just—" "Yes," he said firmly. "You can. You must. James deserves justice. You deserve closure. But we finally—" He touched her face. "I'll be here when you return. What if—" Eleanor's voice broke. "What if you change your mind? What if I come back and you've realized you don't want—" "Won't happen," Jacob said. "Love you. Chose you. We'll be here, waiting." But I could see the fear in his eyes, could see him already preparing for her to leave and never return. He'd been abandoned before, left alone. Every person he'd loved had been taken from him. Now Eleanor would leave too, and some part of him, no matter what he said, believed she wouldn't come back. Eleanor left 3 days later. She packed light, just enough for the journey, left most of her things behind, a promise to herself and Jacob that she would return. 2 months, she said. The prosecutor said 2 months at most. "I'll be here," Jacob said, "working, building, waiting." They stood in the doorway of their home, the house they'd built together, on land that had seen death and was learning to sustain life again. "I'll write," Eleanor promised, "every chance I get." "Me too," Jacob said, then smiled slightly. "Short letters, but letters." She kissed him, long and deep, trying to memorize the feel of him, the taste, the solid reality of this man she'd married. "I love you," she said. "Remember that, no matter how long I'm gone. I love you." "Love you too. Come home." She climbed into the stage. I'd arranged the travel. Would accompany her as far as Denver, make sure she got safely on the eastbound train. As we pulled away, I watched Jacob through the window, standing in front of their house, one hand raised in farewell. He stood there until we rounded the bend, and he disappeared from view. Eleanor turned forward, wiped her eyes. "He thinks I won't come back," she said quietly. "Will you?" "Yes." No hesitation. "This is my home now. He's my home. I just need to finish this business in Ohio. Close that chapter properly. And if the trial takes longer than expected, then it takes longer. But I will come back." I believed her, but I also knew how hard the frontier could be, how distance and time could change things, how good intentions could be derailed by circumstance. I prayed she'd keep her promise, for Jacob's sake and for her own. I returned to Cedar Falls After seeing Eleanor off in Denver, rode out to check on Jacob a week later, found him working obsessively, building an addition to the house, expanding the chicken coop, repairing fences that didn't need repairing, keeping himself so busy he didn't have time to think, to worry, to imagine Eleanor deciding Ohio was better than frontier hardship. "Any word?" I asked. He handed me a letter, written in Eleanor's careful script. "Dearest Jacob, I've arrived safely in Cleveland. The train journey was long but uneventful. I'm staying with James's cousin Margaret. She's been kind, though she doesn't understand why I'm so eager to return to Colorado. You could stay here, she keeps saying. Find respectable work, live among civilized people. But I don't want civilized people. I want you. The trial begins next week. The prosecutor seems confident my testimony will make the difference. The men who killed James have hurt others since. It's time they answered for all of it. I think of you constantly. Wonder what you're building. Whether you're eating properly, whether you miss me as much as I miss you. I'll write again after the trial. Be patient with me. I'm coming home. All my love, Eleanor." Jacob folded the letter carefully, put it in his shirt pocket, over his heart. "She's coming back," he said, like a prayer. Like if he said it enough, it would be true. "She is," I agreed. "Give her time. Justice moves slowly." He nodded, returned to his work, but I could see the fear eating at him, the old wounds reopening. Every day without her was another day. His mind whispered, "She's gone, like everyone else. You're alone again." 2 weeks passed. Another letter arrived. "Dearest Jacob, the trial has been delayed. The defense attorney requested more time to prepare. The judge granted 2 additional weeks. I'm trying to be patient. But every day here feels like a year. I don't belong in Ohio anymore. My past is here, but my future is with you." Margaret introduced me to a businessman. Widower, respectable. She thought we'd be a good match. I told her I already have a husband, the finest man I've ever known. She laughed. "That silent savage from the mountains? Eleanor, you can't be serious." I told her, "You're the most eloquent man I've ever met, that you speak with your hands and your heart, that words are cheap but action is truth." She didn't understand, but I don't need her to. I need you to understand. I'm yours, only yours. I'm coming home. Love always, Eleanor. Jacob read this letter multiple times. I watched him trace her words with his finger, especially those 3 words, "I'm coming home." "You believe her?" he asked me. "Yes, don't you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Want to, but Sarah said she'd always be there. Then she died. Mary and David said they'd be good while. I worked. Then they died." He looked at me. "Everyone promises, then leaves." "Eleanor's not dying, Jacob. She's just delayed." "But what if she decides—" He couldn't finish. "She won't," I said firmly. "That woman married you in front of a hostile crowd, stood between you and a gun, built a life with you from nothing. She's not the leaving kind. Hope, you're right." But hope and certainty are different things. Jacob had hope, but certainty had been beaten out of him by loss after loss. I started visiting more regularly, bringing him news from town, sharing meals, making sure he didn't retreat entirely into isolation. Tom Winters and Sarah came by often too, brought baby Hope to visit. The child was thriving, already trying to smile. Jacob held her sometimes, let her grip his finger, spoke to her in that halting way of his. "Your mama saved you," he'd tell the baby. "Brave woman, like my Eleanor." My Eleanor. He said it like a talisman, a protection against loss. But as weeks turned into a month, I could see him fading, working himself to exhaustion, eating barely enough to survive. "She's not coming," he told me one night. 6 weeks after Eleanor left. Would have heard by now. "Something's wrong." "The trial's still ongoing," I said. These things take time, or she's changed her mind, remembered what civilized life is, realized she married monster. Jacob, I was in cage. She pitied me. That's all. Pity, not love. He was spiraling. I could see it. The old darkness pulling him back down. You need to hold on, I said. Just a little longer. She'll write. She'll come back. Maybe, Jacob said. Or maybe I'm fool. Built life on hope. Hope breaks. I had no answer to that, because he was right. Hope did break. I'd seen it break 1,000 times on the frontier, but sometimes, just sometimes, it held. I prayed Eleanor would prove hope could hold before Jacob broke entirely. The letter came 8 weeks after Eleanor had left. Not from Eleanor, from the Coshocton County Prosecutor's Office. Dr. Morrison, I am writing to inform you that Mrs. Eleanor Stone has completed her testimony in the matter of the State versus Merrick and Walsh. Her statement was instrumental in securing guilty verdicts against both defendants. Mrs. Stone will be departing Cleveland on May 15th via train to Denver, then stage to Cedar Falls. Expected arrival approximately June 1st. Please inform her husband of her imminent return. Respectfully, Harrison Webb, County Prosecutor. I rode immediately to Jacob's homestead, found him sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. He'd lost weight, dark circles under his eyes, the look of a man barely holding on. Jacob, I called, she's coming. He turned slowly. What? Eleanor. She's coming home. Letter from the prosecutor. She finished testifying. She's on her way. For a moment he just stared, as if he couldn't process the words. Then he stood, took the letter from my hands, read it 3 times. She's coming, he said. Really? Coming? Yes. The transformation was immediate, the darkness lifting, life returning to his eyes. When? Should arrive early June, 2 weeks maybe. He was already moving, planning. Need to finish addition, clean house, make garden better. She'll want... Jacob, I interrupted. Slow down. Just be ready to welcome her home. That's all she'll want. But he was a man possessed. For 8 weeks he'd been dying slowly. Now, suddenly, he had reason to live again. He worked like a demon for the next 2 weeks, finished the addition, planted flowers around Sarah's grave, built a new chicken coop twice the size of the old one, made their home beautiful. A palace by frontier standards, all for her. Tom Winters helped. So did I. And to my surprise, Henderson sent his son with tools and lumber. Tell Jacob it's payment for all the work he's done, Henderson said. Man deserves to have his house right when his wife comes home. The community had accepted Jacob completely now. He wasn't the monster anymore. He was Eleanor's husband, the quiet blacksmith who did good work and loved his wife. Funny how a woman's faith in a man could change how others saw him. June 1st arrived, then the 2nd, the 3rd. The stage was late. Jacob grew increasingly anxious, rode into town every day, met each stage, came home alone. Something's wrong, he told me on the 4th day. She should have been here. Stages get delayed. Weather, broken wheels, 1,000 things. She'll be here. But I was worried too. 4 days late was unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. On the 5th day, Jacob didn't come to town. I rode out to check on him, found him sitting on the porch, holding something. Eleanor's letters, all of them, reading them over and over. Not coming, he said flatly. Changed, mind, stayed in Ohio. You don't know that. Know this. I'd lose everyone. Why would she be different? Because she married you, chose you, built a life with you. Married me out of pity, built life because she had nowhere else. Jacob, go away, doctor. I need to be alone. He went inside, closed the door. I stood there, uncertain. He was breaking, right when Eleanor needed him to hold on. I returned to town, Asked at the stage office. They had no news. Just that the Denver stage was running behind schedule. Mudslides, river crossings, the usual delays, but it was hard to explain that to a man who'd been abandoned by everyone he'd ever loved. I was in my office on the afternoon of June 6th when someone knocked. "Dr. Morrison, stage just arrived. Woman asking for directions to Jacob Stone's place." I was out the door before he finished speaking. Eleanor stood by the stage, dusty from travel, exhausted but unmistakably real. "Dr. Morrison!" She rushed forward. "Is Jacob all right? I'm so late, I was worried he'd think—" "He does think," I said. "Thinks you're not coming back. Eleanor, he's bad, really bad." Her face paled. "Take me to him. Now." I brought my horse around. She climbed up behind me. We rode hard for the valley. We found Jacob in the barn, working with grim determination on something. A bed, I realized. A beautiful bed frame, hand-carved with intricate designs. He didn't hear us approach, didn't notice until Eleanor spoke. "Jacob?" He turned, saw her, went absolutely still. "You're not real," he said. "Imagining. Again." Eleanor stepped forward. "I'm real. I'm here. I'm sorry I'm late. The stage was delayed. There were mudslides and—" "Don't care." His voice was flat, empty. "Just another dream. You'll disappear. They always disappear." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She moved closer, reached out to touch him. He flinched back. "Don't. If I touch, you'll vanish. Like Sarah, like children, like everyone." "I won't vanish." Eleanor was crying now. "Jacob, I'm real. I'm here. I came back. Promises mean nothing. Everyone leaves." Eleanor looked at me, desperate. I shook my head. He was too deep in his trauma. Words wouldn't reach him. She thought for a moment. Then she did something remarkable. She slapped him, hard, across the face. Jacob stumbled back, hand to his cheek, staring at her in shock. "Dreams don't slap," Eleanor said. "Ghosts don't leave marks. I am real, Jacob Stone. And I am furious with you. Furious. I traveled 2,000 miles to get back to you, testified against men who wanted me dead, turned down a comfortable life in Ohio, chose you, chose this life. And you think I just, change my mind? Abandon you?" She stepped close, grabbed his shirt. "You foolish man, I am your wife. I love you. I made vows. Do you think I make vows lightly?" Jacob was staring at her, really seeing her now. "You came back." "Of course I came back. This is my home. You are my home." She kissed him then, hard, demanding, real in a way dreams never are. When they separated, Jacob was crying. "Thought I'd lost you. Couldn't bear it. You haven't lost me. You'll never lose me. I'm here. I'm staying. Get used to it." He pulled her tight against him, buried his face in her hair, his whole body shaking. "Love you," he managed. "Love you so much. I love you too, you impossible, stubborn, wonderful man." I slipped away, gave them privacy. Behind me, I could hear them, talking, crying, laughing. The sounds of two people finding each other again after separation. The sounds of healing, of love proven through trial. I rode back to Cedar Falls as evening fell, thinking about faith, about how we hold on to it or lose it. Jacob had nearly lost his, nearly let fear win. But Eleanor had pulled him back from that edge, not with gentle words but with truth, with slapping reality into him, with refusing to let him retreat into isolation. That was love too, not just comfort, but challenge, demanding that the other person stay present, stay engaged, stay alive. I thought of Margaret again, how I'd let her slip away without fighting, how I'd accepted death as inevitable. Maybe I should have slapped death, should have raged against it, should have demanded more time. But that was past, done, gone. What I had now was the present. And in the present I had witnessed something remarkable. Two broken people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances, who'd built a life together, who'd faced separation and doubt and fear, and who'd chosen each other anyway, again and again. That was the real miracle, not that they'd found each other, but that they kept choosing each other every day, despite hardship, despite fear. That was what love meant, what marriage meant. Not perfection, but persistence. Not certainty, but faith. I visited them a week later, found Eleanor working in the garden, Jacob finishing the bed frame he'd been building. They moved around each other with easy familiarity now. The separation had paradoxically made them closer, proved their commitment was real. "Tell me about Ohio," I said to Eleanor over supper. "The trial." She set down her fork. It was hard, seeing those men again, the ones who killed James. They sat there smug, certain they'd walk free like they had before. But they didn't? No. My testimony, combined with evidence from the new murder, was enough. The jury convicted them both. They'll hang next month. How do you feel about that? She considered. Relieved. Not happy exactly. Hanging them won't bring James back, but at least they can't hurt anyone else. "Did you consider staying?" I asked. "Even for a moment?" "Yes," she admitted. Jacob looked up sharply. "Margaret offered me a job, a place to live, safety, comfort." "What changed your mind?" Jacob asked. Eleanor reached across the table, took his hand. "I realized something. James's death was my past, but you're my future. I could spend the rest of my life mourning what I lost, or I could celebrate what I found." She squeezed his hand. "I chose celebration, chose you, chose this hard, beautiful life we're building." Jacob brought her hand to his lips, kissed it. "Thank you." "Besides," Eleanor said with a smile, "Cedar Falls has better gossip. Margaret's social circle was insufferably boring." We all laughed. But underneath the lightness, I could see something solid, something tested and proven. They would make it, through whatever came next, because they'd already survived the hardest test: separation, doubt, the fear of abandonment, and they'd come through together. As I prepared to leave, Eleanor walked me to my horse. "Doctor," she said quietly, "thank you for taking care of him while I was gone, for not letting him give up." "I didn't do much, he was drowning. You're the one who pulled him out." "We pulled each other out," Eleanor corrected. "That's what marriage is, I think. Taking turns being strong when the other is weak." Wise words for someone so young. She smiled. "I've lived a lot in these past months, aged about 10 years. I mounted my horse. "There's one more thing you should know. The community raised money while you were gone, for a bell for the new church." "That's lovely." "They want Jacob to forge it, cast it. His first major commission." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. They trust his skill, his artistry. He's not the wild man anymore, Eleanor. He's one of us now." She looked back at the house, at Jacob visible through the window, working on that bed frame with meticulous care. "He was always one of you," Eleanor said. "You just couldn't see it until I made you look." And she was right. Sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to look away, who insists on seeing the humanity in someone everyone else has dismissed. Eleanor had been that person for Jacob, and in being that for him, she'd saved herself too, from bitterness, from a life defined by loss, from becoming the kind of person who couldn't see past pain to possibility. They'd saved each other. And that, I thought as I rode away, was what frontier legends were made of. Not gunfights or gold strikes, but quiet acts of courage. Two people choosing each other, choosing hope, choosing to build despite every reason to give up. That was the real miracle of the West. Not that we survived, but that we found reasons to keep living. Jacob and Eleanor had found their reason, each other. The bell would be forged, the church would be built. Winter would come again, and they would face it together. But those were stories for another time. For now, in that small valley where death had once reigned, life was taking root, strong and stubborn, like the people who tended it. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The commission for the church bell came in late June, Reverend Walsh himself rode out to Jacob's homestead, the same man who'd refused to marry them a year ago. Now he sat in their parlor, hat in hand, asking for help. "The congregation has raised funds," Walsh said. He spoke directly to Jacob now, not through Eleanor like Jacob was deaf or simple. "We want a bell, not just any bell. Something beautiful, something that will call people to worship for generations." Jacob listened, his face unreadable. "We've heard about your work," Walsh continued, "the tools you've repaired, the ironwork you've done. Henderson says you're the finest smith he's ever seen." "I am blacksmith," Jacob said slowly, "not bell maker. Different. Skill. But you could learn?" Jacob looked at Eleanor. She gave the slightest nod. "Your choice." "Maybe," Jacob said. "Would need to study. Practice. Bells are precise. Get tone wrong and ruins everything." "We have time," Walsh said. "The church isn't finished yet. Won't be ready until next spring. That gives you months to work." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. I could see him thinking, weighing whether he was ready for such a public commission, such a statement of belonging. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Could hire bellmaker from Denver or back east." Walsh met his eyes. "Because you're one of us now. This bell, it should be made by someone who knows this valley, who's bled into this soil, who understands what it means to build something lasting." He paused. "And because I owe you an apology. I refused to marry you and Eleanor, called you something less than human. I was wrong. This is my way of saying so." Eleanor's hand found Jacob's, squeezed. "I'll try," Jacob said. "No promises, but I'll try." Walsh smiled. "That's all anyone can ask." Jacob threw himself into the work with the same intensity he brought to everything. He rode to Denver, spent a week in the library there, studying metallurgy, bell casting, acoustics, came back with pages of notes and diagrams. Henderson let him use the forge behind the store, gave him access to materials. The whole town, it seemed, wanted this bell to succeed. I watched him work when I visited, saw the precision he brought to every step, the way he'd test small pieces of metal, listen to the tone they made when struck, adjust the alloy mixture by tiny increments. "It's not just metal," he explained to me one day, his speech much improved now. Eleanor had been teaching him, patiently correcting, encouraging. "It's music, frozen music. Get the proportion wrong and it sounds dead." He showed me his sketches. The bell would be modest, maybe 2 feet tall, but the design was beautiful. Intricate patterns worked into the bronze, images of mountains, a valley, a small house, their valley, their house. "Eleanor's idea," Jacob said the bell should tell our story, how broken things can be made whole. It's beautiful work, Jacob. Hope so. It's for her, really. The town gets the bell, but I'm making it for Eleanor, to show her love. Built this, built me." I understood then. This wasn't just a commission. It was a love letter, cast in bronze, meant to ring for generations. Summer passed into autumn. Jacob worked steadily on the bell, made 3 failed attempts before getting one that satisfied him. The tone was wrong, he'd explain after each failure. Too flat, too sharp, not beautiful enough. Eleanor would kiss his soot-stained face. "You'll get it right. I have faith." And somehow, her faith made it possible. The 4th attempt, cast in late September, was perfect. I was there when he struck it the first time. The whole town had gathered. Word had spread. Everyone wanted to hear. Jacob stood beside his creation, the bell suspended from a wooden frame. He looked at Eleanor. She nodded. He swung the clapper. The sound that rang out was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Pure, clear, so beautiful it made your chest ache. It echoed across the valley, off the mountains, seemed to fill the whole world. People stood silent, some cried. The sound was that perfect. When it finally faded, No one moved, no one spoke. We all just stood there, stunned by what Jacob had created. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Soon the whole crowd was applauding. Jacob stood very still, overwhelmed, not used to praise, not sure how to accept it. Eleanor went to him, took his hand. "You did it," she said. "You made something beautiful." He looked at her, then at the bell, then at the crowd. "We did," he corrected. "You and me, together." The church bell was installed in November. The building still wasn't finished, but they couldn't wait. The whole community came for the raising, men and women both. Even Marcus Garrett showed up, brought his family. He approached Jacob before the ceremony, the first time they'd spoken since that confrontation on the road. "Mr. Stone?" Garrett said. Formal, stiff. "Mr. Garrett," Jacob replied. "I heard your bell. When you tested it, heard it all the way at my ranch." Garrett paused. "It's beautiful. Tom he'd have liked it." Jacob nodded slowly. "Thank you." "I'm not saying we're friends," Garrett continued. "Don't know if we'll ever be. But I'm saying I respect what you've done, you and your wife. You've earned your place here." He held out his hand. Jacob looked at it, then at Eleanor. She smiled encouragement. He shook Garrett's hand. "Peace?" Garrett asked. "Peace," Jacob agreed. It wasn't forgiveness. Not quite. But it was acceptance. And sometimes that's all you can hope for. They raised the bell into the church tower on a cold November afternoon, clouds heavy with snow, winter coming on fast. Reverend Walsh blessed it, said words about new beginnings, about how this bell would call people to worship, to community, to something larger than themselves. Then he asked Jacob if he wanted to ring it first. Jacob shook his head, pointed to Eleanor. "She should," he said clearly, his voice stronger now, more confident. "None of this happens without her. She saw man in cage, chose to build life with him. Everything comes from that choice." Eleanor was crying. "Jacob, I can't." "Yes," he said, you can. Ring it. Tell the valley, we're here, we're staying, we're home." Eleanor climbed into the tower. We all watched, waited. She pulled the rope. The bell sang, that pure, perfect tone rolling out over the valley, announcing to the world that something good had been built here, something lasting. When it faded, Eleanor climbed down. Jacob caught her, kissed her in front of everyone. No one looked away. No one whispered. We all just smiled, because this was what we'd all come west for. Not gold or land, but the freedom to build new lives, to start over, to choose who we'd become. Jacob and Eleanor had done that, and in doing it, they'd shown the rest of us it was possible. The celebration moved to Henderson's store. He'd prepared food, coffee, even some whiskey for those who wanted it. People congratulated Jacob, shook his hand, ordered commissions. He had more work than he could handle now. "Success," I told him. "You're a success, Jacob." "Strange," he said. "Year ago was animal in cage. Now making church bells. Life is strange. Life is what you make it." "No," Jacob said thoughtfully. "Life is what we make it. Together, me and Eleanor. Can't do alone. Tried. Didn't work. But together," he smiled. "Together we can make anything." Eleanor joined us, slipped her arm through Jacob's. "What are we making?" "Everything," Jacob said. "Family, home, life, everything." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sounds exhausting." "It is. But good exhausted. The kind that means you're living." I left them like that. Two people who'd found each other in darkness, who'd built a life in a hard place, who'd made something beautiful from broken pieces. That was the real craft. Not bell-making, but life-making. And they were masters at it. I rode home through falling snow, the first real storm of the season. Behind me, the church bell rang again. Someone testing it, making sure it still sang true. It did. Perfect and clear. I thought about Margaret. How she'd loved church bells. would stand outside on Sunday mornings just to hear them ring. "They're calling us home," she'd say, reminding us where we belong. I'd lost my home when she died, spent 5 years drifting, going through motions, practicing medicine but not really living. Jacob and Eleanor had reminded me what living looked like, what it required, the courage to build despite loss, to love despite fear, to choose hope when despair was easier. Maybe it was time I took my own advice, time I stopped hiding behind work and grief, time I chose to live again. Margaret would have wanted that, would have told me to stop being a fool, stop mourning, and start living. I smiled, could almost hear her saying it. That tartness she'd had, that refusal to let me wallow. "All right," I said aloud to her ghost. "All right, I'll try." The snow fell heavier, covering everything in white, making the world clean again, new, a good time for new beginnings. Winter settled over the valley, hard and cold. But Jacob and Eleanor's house stood firm. They'd weathered one winter together. This second one felt different. Not a test of survival, but a season to endure, to rest, to be. I visited when the roads allowed, brought news from town, medical supplies, sometimes just company. They always welcomed me, fed me, let me sit by their fire and thaw. "You're here more than Cedar Falls," Eleanor observed one evening in January. "Are we that entertaining, or is Cedar Falls that boring?" "Neither," I said. "I just like being around you two. Reminds me that good things are still possible." Jacob looked up from the harness he was mending. "You're lonely since Margaret died." It wasn't a question, just an observation, the kind Jacob made now that he was speaking more, direct, honest, no cushioning. "Yes," I admitted. 5 years, and I'm still lonely." "Takes time," Jacob said. "Grief is like that. Sneaks up, even when you think you're done with it." "Does it get easier?" Jacob considered. "Not easier, different. Learn to carry it better, like old injury. Aches when weather changes, but doesn't stop you from living." Eleanor set down her sewing. "Doctor, forgive me for being forward, but have you considered remarrying?" I laughed. "I'm past 60, Eleanor, not exactly a catch." "Age doesn't matter. Loneliness does." She looked at Jacob. "We almost didn't try. Both thought we were too broken, too damaged. But sometimes broken things fit together better than new ones. There's no one—" "Judge O'Brien has a daughter," Eleanor said. "Widow herself. Catherine. She's been asking about you." I blinked. "Catherine O'Brien?" "She visits her father sometimes, helps at the church. I've spoken with her. She's smart, kind. Lost her husband 3 years ago." "I'm not looking." "Neither were we," Jacob said. "Sometimes life finds you anyway. Question is, do you let it in, or do you hide?" I had no answer to that. So I changed the subject, but the seed was planted, and I found myself thinking about Catherine O'Brien. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Spring came slowly, grudgingly, but it came. The snow melted. The creek swelled. Green things pushed through brown earth. And one morning in late March, Eleanor woke up sick. Not seriously ill, just queasy. Couldn't keep breakfast down. Jacob panicked. Wanted to ride for me immediately. "I'm fine," Eleanor insisted. "Probably just something I ate." But it continued, day after day. Always mornings, always the same pattern. Jacob insisted I come. I examined Eleanor, asked questions, did some calculations. Then I sat them both down. "You're pregnant," I told Eleanor. The silence was absolute. "I can't be," Eleanor whispered. "The doctor in Ohio said—" "Doctors are wrong sometimes," I said gently. "You're about 2 months along, I'd estimate. Due in late October." Eleanor put her hand to her stomach. "A baby." Jacob had gone very pale. "Sarah died. Baby died. What if—" "Sarah died of childbed fever," I said firmly. "Common complication. Tragic. But Eleanor is healthy, strong. We'll take precautions. Do everything right." "But what if everything goes well?" I countered. What if this child lives? What if you get to be a father again? Jacob looked at Eleanor. Are you scared? Terrified, she admitted, but also hopeful. We made this, Jacob, you and me, a life. He moved to her, knelt beside her chair, put his hand over hers on her stomach. Promise me, he said. Promise you'll be careful, won't take risks, will let me help. I promise, if you promise not to smother me. I'm pregnant, not dying. Can't help worrying. Lost too many. I know. But Jacob, we can't live in fear of loss. We have to trust, have faith. He nodded, didn't speak, just kept his hand on her stomach, where their child grew. The pregnancy was hard on both of them. Eleanor had good days and bad days, morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, exhaustion, aches, but worse was Jacob's fear. He hovered, constantly, wouldn't let Eleanor do anything strenuous, barely let her leave the house. I'm going to smother him, Eleanor told me one day when Jacob was in town. He means well, but doctor, I can't breathe. He's terrified. Last time his wife was pregnant, she died. So did the baby. I know, and I'm trying to be patient, but I'm not Sarah. This isn't that pregnancy. He needs to trust me. Tell him that. I have. He nods, agrees, then goes right back to treating me like I'm made of glass. I had no easy answer, just give him time. As the pregnancy progresses, as he sees you're healthy, he'll calm down. I was wrong. In July, Eleanor fell. Nothing dramatic. Just missed a step coming out of the house. Landed hard on her hands and knees. Jacob saw it from the barn. Ran like demons were chasing him. Are you hurt? The baby. I'm fine, just clumsy. But Jacob insisted I be fetched. Examined Eleanor top to bottom. Baby's heartbeat was strong. No bleeding, no pain. She's fine, I told Jacob. Both of them are fine. But she fell. What if she fell on her knees? The baby is well protected. This happens all the time. But Jacob couldn't let it go. Became even more protective. Started sleeping in a chair next to the bed, watching Eleanor all night, making sure she was still breathing. He's not sleeping, Eleanor told me. Barely eating. This fear is killing him. It's killing both of you. I don't know how to help him. Maybe you can't. Maybe he needs to face this fear himself. Decide whether he's going to trust life or not. The breaking point came in August. Eleanor had gone to Sarah Winters's house. Just a visit, cup of tea. Some time away from Jacob's suffocating worry. She was due back by supper. When darkness fell and she hadn't returned, Jacob mounted his horse, rode to the Winters homestead, found Eleanor there, safe. Just lost track of time talking with Sarah. Jacob didn't say a word, just picked Eleanor up, carried her to his horse, took her home. Put me down, Eleanor demanded. Jacob, this is ridiculous. He set her down inside their house, locked the door. You're not leaving again, he said, his voice shaking. Can't lose you. Can't lose the baby. Can't. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. Sarah didn't think she'd die. Mary and David didn't think raiders would come. Life takes people, without warning, without mercy. So what? Eleanor's voice rose. We're supposed to stop living, lock ourselves away, spend every moment terrified? Yes, Jacob shouted, actually shouted. Yes, better to be terrified and safe than brave and dead. Eleanor stared at him. You're not protecting me. You're imprisoning me. Don't care. Rather have you angry and alive than happy and gone. That's not your choice to make. It is. You're my wife, my responsibility. I won't fail again. And there it was, the heart of it. This isn't about me at all, Eleanor said quietly. It's about Sarah, about Mary and David. You couldn't save them. So you're trying to save me, to prove you're not cursed, not a failure. Jacob turned away. Don't. No, we're having this out. Right now. Eleanor moved in front of him, made him look at her. You couldn't save them, Jacob. It wasn't your fault. You can't control death by being vigilant enough. Life doesn't work that way. I should have been there. Should have. You were at your forge, working, providing, being a good husband and father. The raiders came. That's not on you. That's on them. But if I'd been faster, if I'd heard, if, Eleanor's voice broke. Don't you see? You could if yourself to death. But it won't change anything. They're gone. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you lost them. But I'm here. I'm alive. And this baby, our baby, is alive too. She took his hands, placed them on her swollen belly. Feel that? That's life, Jacob. Real. Present. Growing. You can choose to fear losing it, or you can choose to cherish having it. But you can't do both. Fear and love, they can't occupy the same space. Jacob stood very still, feeling the baby move under his hands. I'm afraid, he whispered. I know. So am I, but we can't let fear win. If we do, the raiders win. Loss wins. Death wins. She held his face. I need you to choose life, Jacob. Choose us. Choose faith over fear. What if I choose wrong? What if... Then we face it together. But we face it living. Not hiding. Not locked in this house waiting for tragedy. Jacob closed his eyes, the battle playing out on his face. When he opened them, something had shifted. I'm sorry, he said. You're right. I've been trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to prevent what can't be prevented. I know. I love you so much. The thought of losing you? I love you too. But loving me means trusting me. Trusting life. Can you do that? He was quiet for a long time. Then, I can try. No promises. But I'll try. Eleanor kissed him. That's all I ask. Just try. Jacob did try. It wasn't perfect. He still worried, still hovered sometimes, but he loosened his grip, let Eleanor breathe, let her live. And slowly, as summer turned to autumn, as Eleanor's belly grew, Jacob began to believe. Not that nothing bad would happen. He was too scarred for that kind of faith. But that maybe, just maybe, something good could happen too, that he could be a father again, that life could give instead of taking, that hope was worth the risk. October arrived. The baby was due any day. Sarah Winters came to stay. You'll need help, she said to Eleanor, and company. Men are useless during birthing. Jacob didn't argue. He built a small room onto the house, a nursery, put the cradle he'd made there, hung curtains Eleanor had sewn. Prepared for this child the way he hadn't been able to prepare for the one who'd died with Sarah. This time would be different. This time he'd be ready. On October 15th, Eleanor's water broke. Jacob rode for me. I arrived to find Sarah already there, Eleanor laboring, doing well. It's going to be fine, I told Jacob. She's strong, healthy. This is a good labor. That's what I thought last time. This isn't last time. This is now. Trust that. The labor lasted 12 hours, long, exhausting, but normal. Jacob paced outside, wore a path in the dirt, prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Finally, near midnight, a cry. Jacob froze, listened. Another cry, lusty, angry, alive. The door opened. Sarah stood there, smiling. You have a son. Jacob couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She's fine, Sarah added. Eleanor's tired, but fine. And your son, he's perfect. Jacob walked to the door, looked inside. Eleanor lay in bed, exhausted, sweaty, hair matted. The most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And in her arms, a baby, red-faced, squalling, unmistakably alive. Come meet him, Eleanor said softly. Jacob moved like a man in a dream, knelt beside the bed, looked at his son. He's real, very real, and very loud. Eleanor smiled. Want to hold him? Jacob took the baby with shaking hands. The infant quieted immediately, just looked up at this strange man with unfocused eyes. Hello, Jacob whispered, his voice breaking. I'm your father. I've been waiting for you for so long. The baby yawned, unimpressed. Jacob laughed, actually laughed, a sound of pure joy. What should we name him? Eleanor asked. Jacob thought, James. After your first husband, he should be honored too. Eleanor's eyes filled. James Brennan Stone. That's beautiful. And David, James David, for my son who died. So he's remembered too. James David Stone. Perfect. Jacob held his son. This new life, this impossible gift. Thank you, he said to Eleanor, for living, for trusting, for giving me this. Thank you for choosing hope, Eleanor said, for choosing us. I left them as dawn broke. A new day, a new life, a new beginning. Jacob Stone, who'd been silenced by grief, had found his voice. Eleanor Hayes, who'd been caged by injustice, had found freedom, and together they'd created something neither could have made alone. Not just a child, but a life, a home, a future. That was the real miracle. Not that they'd survived, but that they'd learned to thrive. I'm an old man now, nearly 80 years on this earth. My hands shake when I pour coffee. My knees complain about stairs. But my memory, that's sharp as ever, especially when I think about Jacob and Eleanor Stone. It's been 20 years since that autumn when they married in Fallow Ridge's town square. 20 years since Eleanor offered herself to a caged man everyone said should hang. Sometimes people ask me if it's true, if she really did that, if he really was a wild man who lived in a cave. I tell them yes, every word of it. They ask me what happened to them, whether the marriage lasted, whether they lived happily ever after like a fairy tale. I tell them this isn't a fairy tale. It's better. It's real. Jacob and Eleanor Stone still live in that valley, still in the house they built together. They have 4 children now. James David, age 19. Then came Sarah Margaret, age 17, named for both their lost loves. Then the twins, Mary and Thomas, age 14. The valley's changed, grown. Other families have settled nearby. A small community has formed. They call it Stone's Valley now, after Jacob and Eleanor. Jacob's smithy is known across the territory. People come from as far as Denver for his work, but his real fame comes from the bells. He's cast 7 more since that first one for Cedar Falls Church, each one perfect. Each one carrying his mark, a small horse carved into the bronze, a reminder of the toy he carried, of the children he lost, of the man he was before grief silenced him. His voice is strong now, clear. You'd never know he spent 5 years mute. He serves on the town council, helps settle disputes, gives advice to young men starting out. The wild man of the mountains is now an elder statesman, respected, even beloved. Eleanor runs the school, teaches reading and writing to valley children. In summer, she tends a garden that's become something of a legend. People come just to see what she's grown. She's written her story down, not for publication, just for her children, so they'll know how their parents met, how love found them in the unlikeliest of places. She showed it to me once, asked if I remembered things the same way. I told her yes, though her version was kinder than mine. She saw the hope even in the darkest moments, saw the possibility where I'd seen only risk. That was Eleanor's gift. Not optimism exactly, but the ability to see what could be built from broken pieces. Marcus Garrett died 3 years ago. Heart gave out while riding his range. At his funeral, Jacob spoke, told stories about Tom Garrett, good stories, times before desperation drove Tom to bad choices. Garrett's widow thanked him. You didn't have to do that after what Tom did. He was your husband, Jacob said. Your children's father. He deserves to be remembered for his best self, not his worst moment. That's who Jacob became, a man who understood that people were more than their worst moments, who'd needed that grace himself and now extended it to others. Sarah and Tom Winters still farm nearby. Hope Winters is 20 now, getting married next month to a young man from Cedar Falls. She calls Eleanor and Jacob aunt and uncle. Spent half her childhood at their house. Says Eleanor taught her to read. Jacob taught her to see that broken things could be fixed. The Winters family and the Stone family, they're bound together by that night when hope was born. by the understanding that life is fragile but worth protecting. Judge O'Brien lived to see his daughter, Catherine, marry me. Yes, I took Eleanor's advice, stopped hiding, started living. Catherine and I had 5 good years together before she passed. Cancer. Nothing I could do but 5 years of companionship, warmth, love. Better than the loneliness I'd been drowning in. I miss her. But I don't regret opening my heart again. Jacob and Eleanor taught me that. Taught me the risk was worth it. The church bell still rings, every Sunday, every wedding, every funeral. Its tone carries across the valley, clear and pure, reminding us of what's possible when you choose creation over destruction. People say it's the most beautiful bell they've ever heard. They're right. But it's not just the craftsmanship. It's what the bell represents. Hope built from despair, beauty wrung from suffering, life chosen over death. That's what makes it beautiful. I saw Jacob and Eleanor last week, rode out to their valley for Sunday supper. They do that now, open house on Sundays, anyone's welcome. The house has been expanded 3 times, added rooms for each child. A proper parlor, a workshop where Jacob teaches young apprentices his craft. Sarah's grave is still there, behind the house, tended carefully, flowers always blooming. "Do you talk to her?" I asked Jacob once. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Tell her about Eleanor, about the children. Think she'd be happy for me, for us. I'm sure she is. She was good woman, deserved better than me running to mountains for 5 years, leaving her grave untended. You were broken. You needed time. Maybe. But I'm grateful I found my way back, found Eleanor, found life again." He looked at me. "Thank you for helping, for not giving up on me." "I didn't do much. You saw me. When everyone else saw monster, you saw patient. That matters." At supper last Sunday, the whole family gathered. 4 children. 3 grandchildren already. James and his wife have 2. Sarah has 1. The table was loud, chaotic, full of laughter and arguments and spilled milk and love. Eleanor moved through it all with practiced ease, settling disputes, wiping faces, making sure everyone had enough. Jacob sat at the head of the table, quieter, but smiling, watching his family. This impossible gift. At one point, he caught Eleanor's eye, just looked at her across the table crowded with children. She smiled back. A whole conversation passing between them without words. We did this, together. We built this. After supper, Jacob pulled out his fiddle. He'd taught himself to play a few years back. Wasn't great, but good enough for dancing. He played while the children danced. Even convinced Eleanor to dance with him. She protested, too old, too tired, but he insisted. I watched them move around the room, not graceful exactly, but comfortable, easy, the way people move who've shared years and hardship and joy. "They're happy," young Thomas said. He'd come to stand beside me. "Ma and Pa, really happy." "Yes," I agreed, "they are." Was it always like this, or did they have to work for it? I thought about that, about the cage, the silence, the fear, the slow building of trust. "They worked for it," I said, "harder than most, but that's what makes it matter. Easy things we take for granted, hard things we treasure." Thomas nodded, absorbing this wisdom. Then he ran off to join the dancing, young, carefree, not understanding yet how rare this was, how precious. But he would, someday. When he was old like me and looking back on his childhood, he'd understand that this loud, chaotic, loving home was built by 2 people who refused to let loss define them, who chose hope when despair was easier, who chose building when running was simpler, who chose each other every day, despite everything. I'm telling you this story now, 20 years later, because someone needs to write it down properly, before I'm gone, before the details fade. The woman who married the wild man, that's how the story's known. But it was never about wild and tame, beast and beauty. It was about two broken people who found each other in darkness, who built a life in a hard place, who made something beautiful from shattered pieces. Eleanor didn't save Jacob. Jacob didn't save Eleanor. They saved each other. By refusing to look away, by standing witness, by choosing partnership over isolation. That's what love is, I've learned. Not fixing each other, not completing each other. Just standing beside each other while you both figure out how to be whole. The sun's going down now. I can see it through my window, painting the mountains orange and gold. Same mountains Jacob hid in for 5 years. Same valley where he built his life again. This land has seen so much. Violence and beauty, death and birth, loss and hope. But it endures, just like the people who live on it. We endure. We build, we love, we lose, we grieve, and somehow, if we're lucky, we find reasons to keep going. Jacob found his reason in Eleanor, in their children, in the community he thought he'd lost forever. Eleanor found hers in Jacob, in the life they built, in proving that one person standing for justice could change everything. I found mine in witnessing their story, in seeing what healing looks like, in learning that it's never too late to choose hope. Tomorrow I'll ride out to Stones Valley again, check on young James's baby. Make sure Eleanor's not overdoing it in the garden, sit on the porch with Jacob and watch the sunset. We don't talk much anymore. Don't need to. After 20 years, comfortable silence says enough, but sometimes he'll tell me stories about the early days when he couldn't speak, when Eleanor was teaching him to trust again. Don't know why. She chose me, he said recently. Broken man in cage. Nothing to offer, just scars and silence. She told me once, I said. She said she saw herself in you, saw her own cage, her own silence, and she couldn't leave you there because she knew what it felt like. Jacob nodded. We were both prisoners, different cages, but same fear, same loneliness. And now? He smiled. Now we're free. Not because cages are gone, but because we're not alone inside them. She's with me, I'm with her, makes all the difference. That's the secret, I think. The thing Jacob and Eleanor understood. Freedom isn't the absence of hardship. It's the presence of someone who'll face it with you. Love isn't the absence of fear. It's the courage to choose hope anyway. Home isn't a place. It's the people who see you, truly see you, and stay anyway. I'm old now. My time's running short. I can feel it. But I'm not afraid. I've delivered babies and closed eyes. I've set bones and held hands. I've witnessed miracles and tragedies. And through it all, I've learned this. The most important medicine isn't in my bag. It's not pills or potions or procedures. It's witness. It's presence. It's standing beside someone in their darkest moment and saying, you are not alone. Eleanor gave that to Jacob in a town square in Fallow Ridge. Jacob gave it back to Eleanor in a valley where death had reigned. And together, they gave it to all of us, showed us what healing looks like, what courage requires, what love makes possible. The church bell's ringing now. I can hear it from my office, calling people to evening service. Jacob's bell, still singing after 20 years. I think of that day he cast it, how the whole town gathered, how the sound rang out clear and true, how Eleanor stood beside him, hand in his, bearing witness to his triumph. That's what I'll remember when my time comes, not the medical victories or the lives saved, but that moment, that bell, that sound proclaiming to the valley, we are here. We survived. We built something beautiful. We chose life. We chose hope. We chose each other. And that choice, that simple, impossible, courageous choice, made all the difference. The sun's fully set now, stars coming out. Same stars that watched Jacob in his cave. Same stars that saw Eleanor arrive in Fallow Ridge. Same stars that will watch over Stones Valley long after we're all gone. The land endures. The mountains stand. The creek flows on. And in a small valley in Colorado, 4 children sleep in beds built by their father's hands. Wake to breakfasts made by their mother's care. Grow up knowing they're loved, wanted, treasured. That's the legacy. Not just what Jacob and Eleanor built with wood and stone, but what they built with courage and faith and stubborn determination to choose hope over fear. A family, a community, a life. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, solid, true. I'm tired now, need to rest. But before I do, I want you to know, if you're carrying grief, if you're silenced by pain, if you're caged by circumstances beyond your control, know this: you are not alone. Someone sees you. Someone understands. Someone is willing to stand witness. And maybe, just maybe, if you choose to trust, if you choose to build, if you choose hope, you'll find what Jacob and Eleanor found, not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a home worth building, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. That's all it takes. That's everything it takes. Dr. Patrick Morrison died peacefully in his sleep on December 3, 1895. He was 79 years old. His funeral was held at Cedar Falls Church. The bell rang for him, the bell cast by Jacob Stone 20 years earlier. Jacob and Eleanor were there, along with their children, and half the territory. People spoke of Dr. Morrison's skill, his dedication, the lives he'd saved. But Jacob spoke of something else. He saw me when I was invisible, tended me when I was untouchable, witnessed me when everyone else looked away. That's what made him great doctor, not his medicine, his humanity, his willingness to see the person, not just the patient. Eleanor added, he taught us that healing isn't about fixing, it's about presence, about standing beside someone while they find their own strength. They buried Dr. Morrison next to his wife Margaret, and next to his second wife Catherine. 3 graves in a row, each marked with flowers from Eleanor's garden. The inscription on Morrison's stone reads, Patrick Morrison, 1816 to 1895. Physician, witness, friend. He saw the human in the broken. Jacob Stone lived to age 82. Eleanor lived to 84. They died within 3 months of each other. Jacob first, Eleanor following soon after. Don't want to live without him, she told her children. We built this life together. Doesn't make sense alone. They're buried in Stone's Valley, next to Sarah Brennan and the children Mary and David. 6 graves now, 2 families, 1 man who loved deeply, twice, and was loved in return. The valley still bears their name, the house still stands, the church bell still rings, and on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, people say you can hear it. Not the bell, but voices, 2 people talking, laughing, building. The woman who married the wild man, the man who found his voice through love. Their story endures, passed down through generations, changing with each telling. But the truth remains. 2 broken people built something whole. 2 caged souls found freedom. 2 strangers became home. That's the real legend of the West, not gunfights or gold strikes, but this. The quiet courage of people who refuse to let hardship break them, who choose to build despite loss, who find hope in the darkest places, who see each other, truly see each other, and say, you are not alone. I will stand with you. We will build this together. And they do. They always do. Because that's what it means to be human, to love, to hope, to build. Even when, especially when, it's hard. That's the story. That's the whole story. And it's true, every word.